Hey everybody, welcome to another BTR NYC here in the very heart of New York City. I'm your host, Lev Polyakov, and with me is the great Reza Jorjani. It is an absolute honor to have you back here with us in New York City. You are a genius, prolific author, philosopher, of course, and as I recently found out, an artist as well, starting all the way back from your childhood. So I could not ask for a greater guest to share this time that we have on Earth with. And I want to let everybody know here that we are living through a very unprecedented time. Things are changing quite a lot, as you could see. Maybe the United States is going to be taking Greenland. As far as Iran, that's going to be a focus of ours today, 100%. But be that as it may, all of these old world things are going away. A lot of people are very concerned because the life that they knew in the 90s is not there anymore. And guiding us through that process, I think somebody like Dr. Jorjani is essential. Because if people think that right now things are screwed up, wait until the spectral revolution happens. And this brings me to your genius book, Thanosis. It is a great pleasure to talk to you, first of all, about this book, about what people can do to prepare themselves for what's coming, as well as tying this in very appropriately, I think, to the change of the New World Order, with the old order going away and whoever's the new dictators, warlords, tyrants, you name it, that are going to be oppressing a new generation of people. As far as how we're going to get out of that level of oppression, let's definitely talk about it today. And as a reminder to everybody who's watching here, this is BTR NYC in New York City, and usually this is a patron-only stream, but this is a very special episode because it's breaking news right now. What's going on in Iran? We want to get this out to everybody, and if you guys want to support the show, just like our wonderful audience over here, guys, thank you so much for coming in today. Make sure to go to patreon.com/breaktherules. Become a patron today, and if you are a $20 patron, you are going to have the opportunity to be here in the studio with us, with Jason. There's a lot of great opportunities to meet some of the smartest people, and I think over here we have some of the most smartest people in New York City joining us. So with that being said, Dr. Jorjani, it is an absolute great pleasure for me to be here with you, and let's talk about Thanosis.
It's always a pleasure to be with you, Lev. Been way too long since we've done this together in person, and was glad to be able to be here with you in your studio during my visit back to New York City. So we had planned to do a show about Thanosis.
Yeah.
You were, of course, one of the first people who I was in touch with about doing a show remotely on my study of the afterlife. But, the course of events have turned in such a direction that Iran is at the crux of geopolitical change in the world yet again, and certainly at the forefront of my attention. So the majority of our conversation will revolve around the ongoing national revolution in Iran. But I think we should open by addressing, at least in broad brushstrokes, some of what we would have discussed regarding Thanosis. And it also affords us an opportunity to frame the events in Iran. And not just the geopolitical significance of Iran, but the significance of Iran to humanity and, to our collective spiritual history in the broadest possible context. So Thanosis is a comprehensive study of death, rebirth, and the afterlife. It goes through about 150 years of parapsychological research, all the way back to the 1890s when the field was still referred to as psychical research. And people like William James and Henri Bergson were among the pioneers. A number of the leading scientists at Oxford and Cambridge in Britain, Sir William Crookes, for example, were the first generation of people to apply a kind of empirical, modern, scientific mindset to the study of the persistence of personality past bodily death. And they looked at everything from channeled communications to poltergeist occurrences, to ultimately people's spontaneous memories of past lives, and also protocols for past life regression hypnosis to be able to unlock suppressed memories of prior incarnations. And I go through that whole history of research in Thanosis. But then I go beyond that to a kind of critical examination of traditional religious views of the afterlife from basically every major culture and civilization in the world, in the light of the empirical evidence that's been evaluated by parapsychology and psychical research. So the modern scientific study of, death, the process of rebirth, and the afterlife and the process of rebirth is used to make a critical assessment of different traditional religious views of the afterlife. And then where the book ends up is with a more practical consideration of what techniques and technologies could be brought to bear on giving us greater agency in navigating what the Tibetans call the bardo state, the transition between death and rebirth. And there, toward the end of the book, I appropriate the Soviet term psychotronics to suggest the development of a type of technology that would integrate psychical abilities and augment psychical abilities in such a way as to, again, give us greater control over what happens to us after we die, and to basically give us an opportunity to resist the machinations and various coercions that people are susceptible to as part of a kind of control system that ensconces not just, mundane life in this dimension of human experience, but that also extends into what some people might imagine as a transcendental reality, right? So the most disturbing subject matter that's addressed by my book, Thanosis, is assessment of empirical evidence coming from remote viewing and also from the body of close encounter experiencer research. In other words, the accounts of various alien abductees that dovetail with near-death experiences and remote viewings of the afterlife state and what's involved, in the transition between death and rebirth. The overlap between these various literatures and bodies of evidence toward the conclusion that the human experience, even after death, is managed by what the Gnostics would have called archons, by some kind of superhuman overlords who are harvesting human energy and who treat our domain of experience as a kind of farm, as both a prison and also a farm.
Loosh, in other words.
Yeah, well, Robert Monroe, who worked with the CIA and set up the Monroe Institute in the 1970s, continued to work with U.S. intelligence, military intelligence throughout the 1980s, through his various journeys out of the body, which I discuss in Thanosis, was one of the people who came to this conclusion that we're being farmed for what he called loosh. I mean, that was his jargon for it, but other people have called it other things. Gurdjieff had a name for it. Gurdjieff, I think, rightly, I don't know if theorized is the right word in the context of Gurdjieff, but he rightly intuited that the moon is in some way involved with this energy harvesting system.
Our souls get recycled through the moon, and then we go back down to Earth.
Yeah, and I don't want to jump the gun in making the connection to Iran, but actually it's a relevant segue that the first person to ever suggest that was the prophet Mani, the Persian prophet Mani, in the 3rd century A.D., 200s, was the first person to say this as part of the development of his Manichaean theology and cosmology. In fact, he said that human souls are processed through the moon. And I do wonder whether Gurdjieff got this idea from Iranian sources, not necessarily Manichaeism, but Gurdjieff was from Georgia, and Georgia was part of Iran until 200 years ago when the Russians conquered it.
Jorjani, Gorgon. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't want to go down.
Well, it's all connected. It comes from the Indo-European word for wolf. And so anyway, and Gurdjieff himself says that he met with esoteric orders that were hidden in the Caucasus Mountains. So it's possible that that's where he got that idea from. In any case, in Thanosis, I argue that there's empirical evidence for it. And especially if you read Thanosis through the lens of my, tome on the UFO phenomenon, namely Closer Encounters, you come away with the distinct impression that whoever is responsible for so-called alien abductions is also responsible for managing the so-called afterlife. And the Gnostics would have called these people archons. They're essentially what the Greeks worshipped as the Olympian gods, what the Sumerians, called Anunnaki, at least the faction of Enlil. And to make the segue to Iran, it's what the ancient Iranian thinker Zarathustra referred to as the class of devas. In Hinduism, to this day, this term is still used. I mean, despite the various sophisticated, relatively erudite, theosophical systems that have developed in North India over the centuries, from Samkhya to Vedanta and so forth, which I address to some extent in Thanosis, it's still the case that Hinduism is deva worship, fundamentally. And the point of origin of Iranian civilization as a distinct historical phenomenon is in the Iranian rebellion against the devas, which actually precedes Zarathustra. So in the Vedic literature, in the Vedas, and by the way, people have this mistaken impression that the Vedas come from India. They don't come from India. The oldest Sanskrit texts that we have found are in Kurdistan. The oldest attested evidence for the Sanskrit language was found in northwestern Iran, namely the Kurdish region of Greater Iran. And it's very clear, despite how politically incorrect it is to say this, in India, that the people who became, the Vedic culture migrated into India from what's now Iran. And so this is a phenomenon internal to Iranian civilization. And in fact, there's a place in northern Iran which is referred to either as Hyrcania, realm of the wolves, right, Gorgon, Varkana in ancient, in one of the ancient Iranian languages, or Mazandaran. And Mazandaran, that area around the Caspian Sea, which is thickly forested and has very high mountains, it's a corruption of the word Mazare Indrayan, meaning the domain, the lands of the Indra worshippers. And in ancient Iran, in the Shahnameh that's sitting over there on the table, one of the heroic tasks of Rostam, who's basically the Iranian Hercules, is to go up into Mazar Indrayan and kill devas, to slay devs and dev worshippers in Mazar Indrayan. So the oldest opposition to the devas in Iranian civilization dates back to the Mithraic religion that figure, Rostam, the Scythian Hercules, is an epitome of. And in the Avesta, the oldest Iranian scriptures, there is a hymn to Mithra, the Mehriyasht, which is much older than the Gathas of Zarathustra, and it was subsequently amalgamated into the Zoroastrian scriptures. where, when centuries later, like centuries after Zarathustra, a formal Zoroastrian religion started to take shape, they tried to, in a very understandable way, in a way that you see in many cultures, appropriate Mithraic liturgies and rituals into Zoroastrianism. And they turned Mithra into one of the Yazatas, which is, like a minor deity, one of the deities, like an angel, sort of.
At least they didn't turn Zoroaster into a deity.
Right, right. There's no idol worship of Zarathustra in Zoroastrianism the way that there is of Jesus in Christianity. Okay, but in any case, what's important is this. If you look across all human cultures, whether it's the pagan cultures, like the Greco-Roman world, the Olympian gods, and then their Roman equivalents, where like Jupiter is Zeus, and where Venus is Aphrodite, and so on and so forth, where Neptune is Poseidon, and so on. Whether it's the Greco-Roman pantheon, or it's the Devas of India, or the Anunnaki that were worshipped by the Sumerians and then the Babylonians, the Iranian valorization of the Titan Mithra, who brings the fire of knowledge and who's also a war god in the sense of an avenger who enforces oaths. Because see, the chief characteristic of the Devas is that they're deceivers.
Yeah.
They lie to everybody about everything and manipulate people through false revelations.
Mm-hmm.
And so actually the epithet that Zarathustra eventually uses to describe them all is druj, the lie. They're the promulgators of the lie. And so the, defining characteristic of Iranian civilization at its foundation was this Mithraic rebellion in the name of justice, in the name of oath-keeping, and the bringing of the fire of knowledge and enlightenment to humanity, so as to afford people the ability to live self-directed lives free from these sacrifices demanded by the Devas.
Now, when it comes to sacrifice, people would think of sacrificing cows, for instance, as they've done with the mumbling priests in pre-Zoroastrian Iran, as well as Israel, as well as various Canaanite areas. But the depiction of Mithra, one of the most common depictions of him, is getting ready with a dagger to slay this poor cow. Meanwhile, there's a crow and there's a snake and a dog getting all excited about the blood coming out and this ray of Helios that's shining on Mithra. So what exactly is going on here? What's the message supposed to be?
Yeah, it has nothing to do with killing cows.
Okay.
So it's astrological symbolism. It is Mithra as Aries slaying the age of Taurus as a reference to the precession of the equinoxes. So the Magi were the most adept astrologers of the ancient world. They were the masters of astrology in the whole ancient world. And they had understood the precession of the equinoxes as Mithra's overpowering of the celestial sphere governed by Zorvan, who you could consider Kronos or Saturn in a Western context. So Kronos or Saturn or Zorvan in ancient Iranian is the lord of time who attempts to ensconce human life in the shackles of celestial fate, by basically moving people's souls through astrological influences. And the slaying of the bull is just one example of Mithra's power to rise up above the earth and grab hold of the axis of the world and shift it so that the constellation that rises before dawn on the spring equinox, the constellation that the sun rises up into at dawn on the spring equinox, changes every 2,000 and some odd years. And they, metaphorically understood that to be Mithra basically taking control over the celestial axis from Zurvan, Mithra as an avatar of the human spirit, reasserting our free will over celestial determination.
Much like the pirate flag, which I don't want to go too far into the weeds, but it is very interesting how you pointed how the degrees of the bones on the pirate flag is associated with this axial tilt. And again, for those who don't know what we're talking about, this is the precession of the equinoxes, where right now we're going into the age of Aquarius, from the age of Aries, which was, the age of Christianity. And would that be right, by the way,
No,
to say...
Pisces.
Pisces. Would it be correct to say... So we're going from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. Would it be correct to say that the age of Pisces was the age of Christianity? The Christianity...
No, it would be correct to say that a bunch of retarded cultists who believe in a schizophrenic god, lowercase g, misappropriated Mithraic symbolism like the Vesica Pisces, and basically supplanted what would have been a proper Piscean expression of the Mithraic theosophy, which you can see very clearly in a figure like Apollonius of Tyana. Apollonius of Tyana, who interestingly shares like 80% of his biography with Jesus. You read Philostratus' Life of Apollonius of Tyana. He was preaching in Judea, and wherever this guy would go, he would preach in the local language. He knew like multiple languages. And in Judea, Apollonius preached in Aramaic, and he performed exactly the same miracles as Jesus, and then the Roman authorities tried to crucify him. And he was capable of bilocation and so forth, and he escaped crucifixion, traveled across the Persian Empire, and ultimately wound up living to a ripe old age in India with a group of his most devoted disciples. And interestingly enough, in Kashmir, there are a group of people who claim that the tomb of Jesus Christ is there, exactly where the biography of Apollonius says that Apollonius wound up. And when you look at the life of Apollonius as written by Philostratus, you see that basically it's a kind of quasi-Pythagorean Mithra cult with a lot of solar symbolism. So, and at the same time, the teaching of Apollonius has this like Piscean spirit to it. And so I think what happened with Christianity is that the next stage in the unfolding of the Mithraic project was potentially misappropriated and warped.
Could that be the act of the Druge, the lie, that's making itself known in this particular age as such, where it's not just an accident, that in a way, I know like you're not a big fan of fate, but that certain, let's say, higher orders wanted Christianity to be the thing, and then obviously Islam coming in to also be the thing, but of a, let's say, harsher flavor. Like these were intentionally inserted into our history in order to steer it towards, a different end than if Apollonius would have been the guy.
Yeah, exactly. And the contemporary relevance of that, with a view to what's exploding in Iran right now, is that the core of the Iranian national identity, right, the foundation of the Iranian civilizational ethos, is opposed to the belief structure of every major religion and culture on the planet. So insofar as the majority of the Iranian people, after 47 years under an Islamic theocracy, have largely rejected Islam, hard to get a formal poll done in the Islamic Republic, but informal polls show that not more than 30% of Iranians are still Muslim. Okay? Maybe 20% have nominally adopted some form of Zoroastrianism, which doesn't in any way mean they belong to some kind of Orthodox Zoroastrian church, okay, which is a contradiction in terms. And maybe, another 10, 15% of them have some kind of vague, eclectic, broadly Mithraic sense of spirituality. And then you got a whole bunch of atheists also, just straight up secular atheists in Iran. But most informal polls show that not more than 30% of Iranians are Muslims. And if we're to judge by what's happened over the past few nights, where literally tens of mosques and seminaries have been burned to the ground in Iran by protesters. 25 mosques in Tehran alone were burned to the ground night before last. Okay? So the Iranian people have rejected Islam after 47 years. Not just an Islamic regime, but they rejected Islam because this Islamic regime actually imposed Islam in a true form on the Iranian people for the first time in many centuries. It was a Sharia-based regime. And so what identity are the Iranian people going to fall back on, right? And we'll unpack this in depth and detail, but just up front, long story short, if you have a deeper understanding of political philosophy, you realize that the real constitution of a country is never contractual. Like, for example, the United States Constitution is contractual. The United States is an artificial, contractual nation. Whether America could ever become a real country is a question. It isn't yet. It does not have a constitution in the sense of an ethos that's shared by the people, that's unique to America, that didn't come from somewhere else, and that provides a unique point of spiritual orientation. Okay? Iran has had that for more than 2,000 years. And what is that? Well, it's Mithraic and Zoroastrian. And that Mithraic Zoroastrian ethos, which to translate it into Western terms you could call Promethean, is opposed fundamentally to the basic belief structure of every other religion and culture on earth. So, you know, I'm sure the future regime of Iran particularly would want to have good relations with India. But the fact of the matter is that those are Deva worshippers, okay? And just as you suggested, Judeo-Christianity and Islam would be seen from an authentic Iranian perspective as devas warping the minds of masses of people with false revelations, okay, that have all kinds of deleterious effects on society, from the Inquisition and the Crusades through to the genocidal Islamic jihad of various cultures. So one of the more profound observations that can be made about the contemporary situation, what we see unfolding in Iran right now, and why so much of the international mainstream media is hesitant to cover it, is because we know that, NBC, CBS, ABC, really since they were founded, have had intelligence operatives embedded in their network who guide reporting policy whenever it comes to any kind of geopolitically sensitive subject. And even if these ninny journalists don't understand the first thing about Iran, the intelligence operatives are getting directives from people in the various agencies, especially CIA, who've done very careful analyses. And they are terrified of what's unfolding in Iran right now.
They want Iran to remain this Islamic theocracy.
Or, as one British newscaster put it, a moderate Muslim country. Is Iran perhaps evolving into a moderate Muslim country? They'd love that.
Yeah.
But what they don't want to see is a country where, listen, the entire repressive apparatus of the Islamic Republic is still intact right now. The IRGC is intact. The riot suppression people, the Basij, are intact. Yeah. On top of that, they're importing Arab fighters from the Hashd al-Shabi of Iraq and Hezbollah of Lebanon, who don't even speak Persian, to come and shoot Iranians dead on the streets, right? The death toll right now, last I checked, was about 4,000 people who've been massacred. 4,000, okay? 3,000 just over this weekend. And about 11,000 other people have been arrested, and most of them are going to receive a death sentence under the law of basically being an enemy of God. In other words, they're being considered apostates. Because, frankly, they've been going and doing things like burning seminaries and mosques. So, yeah, they're apostates. The last thing that these Western intelligence agencies want is a population that has the courage to burn down seminaries and mosques, forming a government that is going to make policy on Islam. Okay? Because the policies that it will make will repudiate the entire leftist social justice global open borders agenda that is basically threatening metropolitan Europe with the imposition of Sharia law, and is even making inroads now into the United States.
Yeah, look at New York with Mamdani.
Including here in my hometown.
Yeah.
Okay? So that, for example, Mamdani is exactly like the pseudo-intellectual socialists, leftists, who helped sell Ayatollah Khomeini to the Iranian people from 1977 to 1979. You had people like Ibrahim Yazdi, Sadiq Qutbzadeh, Mehdi Bazargan, Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, who seemed like perfectly reasonable Western socialist intellectuals, and who packaged Khomeini and the Ayatollahs as if they were some kind of Gandhi-like anti-colonial liberation, that had come to free Iran from the supposedly oppressive regime of the Shah, right? And even an intellect on the level of Michel Foucault gobbled this shit up and promoted it in Western newspapers, right? So Mamdani is that. And New York is now starting to go through what London went through 20 years ago. And, now 10, 15 years from now, we're going to have Sharia zones in Brooklyn and Queens and the Bronx the way, they have it in suburbs of London.
Quick question about that. So as far as England goes and pretty much all of Western Europe, there's been mass migration waves into those areas. As far as New York City goes and the United States in general, the migration waves have been curtailed, at least right now, in terms of no more of this open border policy. So if we are being realistic, how many Muslims do live in the New York City metro area, and what are certain forecasts that can be made with what exactly is capable of happening here?
Too many. And Mamdani is emboldening them, right? So that the other night, it was almost, I think, as we were arriving in New York, I saw there a bunch of people protesting, and I think it was Union Square, calling for Kristi Noem to be hung and for ICE agents to be murdered. Just with an open megaphone. Legal protest, the police don't descend on them, and they're calling for the execution of government officials, right? So I think there are already enough Muslims here and leftist sympathizers, the Green-Red Alliance, right? Leftist sympathizers who, to the extent that Mamdani cripples the police department, which is something that he's doing already, will be emboldened, and we're going to start to see the ghettoization of New York City. And then, in terms of federal immigration policy, I wouldn't count on the fact that the policies of the Trump administration will necessarily endure, or even for that matter, that the United States government is going to continue to be functional, and we can go there too.
So do you see, for example, there being an infiltration of the NYPD, for instance, over time that's going to bring in the activists that are just the crazy activists shouting their slogans out in the street? It's going to bring them into positions of power. But right now we still have people like Mrs. Tish, for instance, who runs she's the commissioner, right? And I believe that she's still going to remain commissioner for now. I don't know if you know the inside baseball there.
Jessica Tish and I went to school together. And point of fact, we were in the same grade. We knew each other. And she ran against me for president in the middle school. Anyway, I won't get into the details of why that election went the way that it did. But, they have a lot of endowments around the city, like the Tisch School of the Arts at NYU, the Tisch Zoo, and so on and so forth. In any case, I went to school with Jessica, and we were in the same grade, and we had very close friends in common. I heard that Mamdani demoted her to the level of the garbage collector. So apparently, in the intelligence and security apparatus of New York City, after the mayor, the police commissioner is the most important person in terms of, intelligence gathering and regular briefs about potential threats and so forth, and also coordination with federal authorities. The police commissioner of New York is incredibly important as a point of contact between the mayor of New York City and the CIA and NSA and FBI, okay? So that person typically had priority. When Mamdani came in, I read one story that said that he immediately demoted Jessica Tish to the level of priority of the sanitation, head of the sanitation department, and that she was no longer involved in his intelligence briefings, which is a grave threat to the security of the city, obviously.
Yeah.
And at the same time, he's doing this while he himself has not managed to secure federal intelligence clearance. So that, another thing is that the mayor of the city of New York is not like the mayors of other cities in the country, most other cities. New York City mayor usually has a top secret level security clearance for various reasons. And Mamdani hasn't been given that. He hasn't been given any security clearance. So here he is with no security clearance. So he's not communicating with the feds, and he's demoted his police commissioner and cut her out of the loop of his own briefings. And so you can see right there a huge threat to the security of the city.
What would you say to people who are on the fence, the Francis Fukuyama end of history types that are starting to recognize these things happen? They may not be able to articulate into words necessarily, but they're almost ready to make the jump into doing something that, let's say, would be required in order to save New York City. But one of the things that they're very much afraid of is they don't want to be seen as the bad guys, number one. And number two, they don't want to, and I can empathize with this view, that they don't want to do whatever will end up turning them into what they're seeing happening with Donald Trump right now in the taking of Greenland, just this third world type of thuggishness. They really try to resist going into that direction because, they're not stupid. Like, they've learned through history the kind of things that end up happening when a minority of pretty intelligent, relatively intelligent people end up taking power in their own hands. Power ends up corrupting. So I think that's one of the things that's holding them back, as well as wanting to preserve our institutions from addressing this, if it does need to be addressed this way, in the kind of way that would have made those same people just faint a couple of years ago.
So a few points on that. But before I get into making a few really dark observations.
For YouTube safety,
let me just clarify something. So who is it that you imagine would intervene? When you say Francis Fukuyama types, like what kinds of people can you imagine sort of forcefully intervening in this situation to save the city?
I would say not even forcefully intervening. I would say considering.
Like who, for example?
For example, Mike Bloomberg.
Mike Bloomberg does not have the backbone for something like that. And especially not at this age. I mean, that guy, how old is he now? No. Definitely. You got any other candidates?
Well, in general, the people who I'm speaking about.
Also, Bloomberg's Jewish.
Oh, well, yeah.
So for him to be the one who comes out against these pro-Hamas lunatics, it is not going to work sociologically.
Okay, so instead of naming names, if we just have a certain personality type, somebody who went to an Ivy League school.
I wish we had such a person. Yeah. We don't have. Who?
But you know who I'm talking about, right? Like somebody who's in the elite.
What moron's idea was it to run Cuomo against Mamdani? Like, do we not have a better candidate in the city of New York? And this goes to my darker observations. And one is that, and I hate to say this because I love this city. This is my city. This is my home. Okay? And it's been incredibly integral to my writing and work as a philosopher. Gotham bleeds through my work. But it isn't the same city anymore. A demographic shift has already taken place in New York to the point where the New York City of the 1980s, let alone before that, just doesn't exist anymore. Too many good New Yorkers have left the city for other parts of the state or the country. And too many of the wrong kind of people have moved here. And when I say too many of the wrong kind of people, I don't just mean immigrants. I mean also,
transplants.
Well, no, but look, cutthroat finance types and lawyers and just people who don't contribute anything to the culture of the city and who don't have any, deeper values. Mm-hmm. In New York City used to be a place of art and literature and higher intellectual contemplation. It was a place where the most eclectic thinkers and writers would gather together and inspire each other, and where subcultures flourished. Subcultures that were rebellious and interesting in constructive ways, right? That's not the case anymore. So number one, you don't have the demographic base to fix this. It doesn't work. And which is why you also don't have the candidate. Because in a democratic system, the candidate emerges from the population base. So the demographic is not there to produce the right candidate to run against Mamdani, which is why they ran Cuomo against him, okay? And then the second thing, and here is going to get really dark, but we have to go here because it's going to be relevant to the rest of the conversation.
As long as it's said in the way that you
No, don't worry. I won't be making any death threats yet. I won't be making any death threats yet. Maybe later. Look, hate to break it to you folks, but if you've been following some of the things I've written, especially on my Substack, there's a publicly available piece on this on my Substack. It's not behind a paywall, called Convergent Catastrophes. And I've written about this in a number of my books. So a number of converging catastrophes are going to take place between 2027 and I would say roughly 2045. And I'm basing this on remote viewing data from a handful of the top remote viewers who worked for the CIA, the Defense Department, and the NSA, some of whom I know personally, and all of whom have gone on record basically attesting to the fact that they agree that a series of convergent and mutually reinforcing catastrophes are going to take place over the course of the next 20 years that will effectively end the modern world as we know it. And the worst of these is a geophysical catastrophe, which is cyclical. It happens roughly every 12,000 years. The last one is what was memorialized as the flood of Noah, or the flood that destroyed Atlantis in the writings of Plato. And it results from a periodic slipping of the Earth's crust over the mantle. And there are various theories. There are various rival theories, all of which have been sidelined by the mainstream geological establishment. But there are various theories, like, for example, Charles Hapgood's theory. Ben Davidson has a rival, more radical theory that he's been promulgating, these days in the contemporary, context. Various theories conceptualizing how it is that this happens, why it happens, how significant the shift of the crust will be, whether it's by several thousand kilometers, whether it's by 90 degrees. So, there's debate over that. But what I can tell you is that all the remote viewers have seen that by the year 2045, the poles of the Earth are in a different place with respect to the land masses. And Antarctica and Greenland have been pulled from out of the polar regions, and the ice sheets on those land masses are melting precipitously. So this will result in two things, both of which are catastrophic for our dear city of New York. One is that when the Earth's crust slips like that, and by the way, it happens in a few hours. It happens within one day over the course of a number of hours. And by the way, dramatically, if it's nighttime, what you see is that the stars fall from the sky. So the stars, which are very slow in the way they move, they suddenly fall. Mm-hmm. And ancient myths have recorded this from all around the world.
And how would a person feel if they're just standing in place while those stars are being seen falling?
That's a good question. I don't think you'd start floating or anything. It's not going to create zero gravity, but you would probably feel something. Anyway, the immediate effect of that is that the oceans are tossed from out of their basins. Okay? You can imagine. So the oceans are all tossed out of their basins, and it results in catastrophic tsunamis worldwide. And where there aren't mountain ranges as barricades, like, for example, in the United States, we have the Sierras. In California, even before the Sierras, the San Bernardino Mountains. Here we have the Appalachians and the Catskill Mountains closest to New York City, right?
Yeah.
The Cascadian Mountains in the Pacific Northwest. Where there aren't such high mountain barriers, During that tsunami, the ocean could go inland by several hundred miles. Several hundred miles. Everything in that range will be wiped out. So first of all, the tsunamis are going to destroy anything anywhere near the coast. Secondly, once Antarctica and Greenland are outside the polar region and they melt precipitously, you're going to have a more enduring sea level rise of approximately 200 feet. And the remote viewers have all seen this. New York City is completely underwater in the year 2045. And judging by some specific remote viewing sessions that were held for 2038, even by then, the city's completely devastated. So we have maybe another 10, 15 years in this city. Therefore, Mamdani and whatever the fuck he does here is really mainly going to serve as a warning to other parts of the country and other parts of the Western world that are more inland and that have a better chance of surviving. He'll be like New York will wind up being like a canary in the coal mine situation, as if we shouldn't have already learned from, Detroit or Dearborn, Michigan, or London or Paris or Munich or, Manchester or et cetera, Berlin, and the rest of the Western world.
There may be a way to tie this into Thanosis as well, where if we're talking about the legend of Atlantis, where the people were, and I know this is kind of contrary to your view, let's say, of the nature of the people, but as the legend goes, the people got corrupt, and then this great flood came. It almost seems that New York City, since it's getting to this really low level, or will get to this low level, then it will get underwater almost as some kind of a quote-unquote divine punishment. And I'm not saying that that is a divine punishment.
I'll tell you what I find interesting about that.
Yeah.
Of course, I completely reject the biblical frame of interpretation there, but you are onto something. And what you're onto is the fact that from a conservative moral standpoint, cosmopolitan cities are corrupt.
Sure.
And, I mean, they're the Babylons of the world, right?
Yeah.
And most of the world's cosmopolitan cities are built either along coastlines or along rivers. Makes sense, right? Why that would be the case.
Yeah.
Okay? Because of trade.
Yeah.
All right? Seafaring trade. And also where, you need to move massive resources to build an inland city. So the cities that aren't along the coast are usually along rivers because you can move the resources up the river to then build the city along the coast of the river. So it makes sense that most of the world's major cities are along coastlines or along the river, which means they're all going to go under. Okay, like for example, the Mississippi River basin is going to flood horribly. It's not just the coast, it's at the Gulf of America. The Gulf of Mexico is going to flood into the whole Mississippi River basin, right? And destroy all the cities along the river. Now, you know what the one exception to that is in the whole world?
Quebec?
No, they have Quebec City. Quebec City is nice. I've been there.
Yeah,
it's
you
nice.
were talking about Quebec before.
It's one
is it
city.
possible?
Quebec City is a charming city.
Okay.
It's a very European city. Unlike Montreal, it will be high enough above sea level to survive.
All right,
so it's definitely a candidate place for anyone to consider moving. But you better speak French because those people, they're very French.
Yeah,
so much more French than anybody in France. So you better learn to speak French. Quebec City is a charming place, but it's one relatively mid-sized city. It's actually not really a global city. If you go there, you see Montreal's a global city, but it's going to go under. The one place that's an exception is Iran. So Iran has, 8 major cities, at least, and none of them are along coastlines. Iran did not build a single significant city along the Persian Gulf coastline, nor along the Caspian coastline. There are a few port towns along the Persian Gulf coastline. And there are some very charming seaside-like towns along the Caspian coast. But then also, remember, along the Caspian coast, very quickly you get to the Alborz Mountains and the Hyrcanian highlands, and those are like thousands of feet above sea level. So all of Iran is on something called the Iranian Plateau. The Iranians, the Aryans, named after themselves. Iran is one of the most high-altitude countries in the world. And every one of its major cities is built on that plateau. So when you look at the flood projections for the tsunamis, as I have, Iran is perfectly safe.
Oh.
It is a country 3 times the size of France with sophisticated metropolitan areas, multiple ones, at a safe enough altitude above the sea level rise that's coming. And with huge mountain ranges as barriers to the tsunamis, Iran has 3 major mountain ranges protecting its inland territory, even from the tsunamis, let alone from the sea level rise. So, institutions like the Central Intelligence Agency, who, by the way, has an extensive dossier on this geophysical disaster, CIA has a whole study that they did of this. They know this. They know that Iran is geostrategically vital, and that whoever controls that area, or whatever power emerges from that area, after this catastrophe, might well be a decisive force in shaping the world order.
Yet they want the Islamic theocracy to control that area. That seems kind of counterintuitive.
The persistence of the Islamic Republic beyond the current crisis, as a result of a potential negotiation that Trump has now indicated today that he's interested in engaging with this regime, the form of the Islamic Republic that would come from out of that would be a defanged, subjugated, dysfunctional, humiliated state that is incapable of any kind of self-directed constructive development. So, in effect, if you're trying to preserve the Islamic Republic now, what you're trying to do is cripple Iran and the Iranian people. And so when Trump announced on Air Force One today that after about a week of Iranians being massacred, especially in the last 72 hours, where again we've seen, about 3,000 people just absolutely brutally gunned down in the streets, again in some cases by Arab militias that have been imported. Trump is ready to do a nuclear negotiation with this regime over the dead bodies of all these valiant Iranian youth that have come into the streets over the past 2 weeks. Why? You have to look at Donald Trump's psychology. You have to look at his history of wheeling and dealing with dictators, like Kim Jong-un, like Putin.
Sure.
Donald Trump, they asked him about Reza Pahlavi. Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi is the widely accepted, popularly endorsed leader of the current Iranian national revolution. And he's taken the responsibility even of giving specific directives for the objectives of street demonstrations on any given night. Okay, so he's really he's gotten out front and he's leading the revolution. And they asked Trump what he thinks of this guy. And he said, he's a very nice guy. He's a very nice guy. But Donald Trump doesn't like nice guys. You know why?
Why?
Because Donald Trump likes to dominate people. Back in the 80s in New York, we all knew who Donald Trump was, by the way. In New York in the 80s, New Yorkers knew Donald Trump. The rest of the country didn't know him. We knew who Donald Trump was. There were these stories about how Donald Trump used to pay homeless people to come up off the street into Trump Tower, and he would beat them up.
Yeah. You're not the first person who told me this, by the way.
I'm not surprised. And then he'd dump them back on the street. This man likes to dominate and humiliate people. And it's especially good for him to dominate what he calls strong men, tough guys. Remember what he said about al-Jolani? So Jolani was a fucking ISIS commando. This guy was responsible for basically enslaving women and children and subjugating Kurds and other people to Sharia law, right? Literally participated in Islamic armies that went around enslaving and capturing people. And Trump says he has a very strong background, He's a tough guy, right? He likes that. He likes to then assert his dominance over Jolani to say, look, I took a tough guy and I made him my bitch. Look at me, okay?
It's almost like his collection of little pets
that
he has.
That's right.
Pit
And
bulls, if you ever seen those weird-looking pit bull
remember what he
breeds,
said
yeah.
about Kim?
Yeah.
I get along with you. Babe, remember, my button's bigger than his button,
Mm.
right? This is why Trump wants to deal with the mullahs over the dead bodies of thousands of massacred Iranians. Because the last thing Donald Trump wants, and we're talking from his personal psychology, then I'm going to go into how the intelligence agencies are manipulating his personal psychology. Because they have a much deeper, more long-range agenda. But he's incredibly useful to them. Because the last thing Donald Trump wants is an Iran that's capable of integral, autonomous economic development and is in a position to choose what business deals it wants to make and doesn't want to make. And an Iran that's led by someone whose father was an emperor and whose grandfather was also the Shah of Iran, who comes from a pedigree, and who's loved by his people. Reza Pahlavi, for whatever faults he has, and anyone who's been following me for a long time knows that I had the harshest criticisms of him, of anyone in the Iranian opposition. But the fact of the matter is that under the current conditions, in this state of emergency, as Carl Schmitt would call it, he is very much beloved and accepted by the Iranian people as their representative, and at least as the guarantor of transition from out of the Islamic Republic into some new form of regime through the organizing of a democratic national referendum, where people can decide whether they want a constitutional monarchy like Sweden and Spain, or whether they want a republic, right? People trust him with that task. And Trump hates that because people hate Trump. Trump has very little support left in America, even on the right. Even on the right, there are various challengers whose names I don't want to mention because they're scum and I don't think they should be platformed. There are people to the right of Trump who have challenged his position even among the Republicans. And then, of course, we know the rest of the other half of the country thinks of him. So Trump, number one, he doesn't like nice guys. So it doesn't suit him to dominate Reza Pahlavi. Number two, he doesn't want to deal with a Persian sovereign who's accepted and loved by his people, because Trump himself is hated by his people. Okay? So this is the sick personal psychology of a man who wants to make a deal with the Islamic Republic over the blood of thousands of massacred Iranian people fighting unarmed against this regime in the streets over the past 2 weeks. But the deeper agenda is the agenda of the CIA and MI6. You know, the worst country in terms of coverage of this Iranian national revolution over the last 2 weeks is unsurprisingly the United Kingdom.
Oh, yeah.
Because, of course, British intelligence in 1978, 79 played a key role in engineering the Islamic so-called revolution in Iran, together with the CIA. The British were big in terms of organizing the propaganda campaign for Ayatollah Khomeini. And the British have a history of supporting the Ayatollahs in Iran going back, at least 120 years or so. The British attempted to colonize southern Iran, ultimately unsuccessfully, but, they really massively oppressed people in that part of the country, even organized a famine in the early 20th century in southern Iran. The British have always had it in for Iran. And so MI6, the CIA, they have a longer-term agenda, which Donald Trump's personal psychology is very useful for.
Do you see the deep state people in the United States and England going back to the Nordic question when it comes to this kind of sadistic schadenfreude, beating up of homeless people type activity? Is that something that you see being linked to the kind of disturbing things that we've talked about before? These, allegedly these Nordic beings have been up to here dealing with people. And does this also translate to some kind of a connection between Donald Trump and the Nordics themselves and certain secret technology? Because like we saw recently, at least allegedly, what was reported about Venezuela when they were taking Maduro, there were these weird sonic weapons that were being used. There were, I think, 20 guys who went in there, special forces guys, taking out 200 people. So this sounded like some kind of a demonic nightmare, according to the people who were on the ground there. Yet it's still weird for me to imagine the kind of, down-home cooking country politics system that we have here in America, and all of this completely advanced, beyond our imagination weaponry. The two things just don't go together in my mind, Jason.
Because we have a breakaway civilization in this country. And, over the past 3 months or so, I had begun a project that was essentially a book about how to save America by reintegrating the breakaway civilization, right? So from 1947 onward, as I've argued in more than one of my books, there's also a number of pieces on my Substack that deal with this subject, the Nordic breakaway civilization. From 1947 onward, in particular after we incorporated the remnants of Nazi Germany in various scientific fields, especially aeronautical engineering and propulsion, we wound up with an unaccountable deep state in this country, what Eisenhower called military-industrial complex, that had tremendous capabilities and extensive infrastructure that was occluded from the rest of the population, okay? A hidden, dark underground America, an American underworld that was capable of reaching deep into the solar system. And from what I've been able to piece together, Lockheed Martin developed technology as early as the 1960s that allowed American astronauts to reach Saturn and its moons. Not NASA astronauts, not astronauts beholden to the civilian government of the United States, American astronauts working for a rogue black operation. So the question is, to what extent does this entity have any allegiance to the United States, right? And in this regard, I think it's particularly telling that there have been recent whistleblower testimonies like that of David Grush just in the last couple weeks.
Yeah.
Confirming that the last guy who was in a position to centrally manage these breakaway projects was Dick Cheney. So there's this group called Majestic or MJ-12, probably not called that anymore. But functionally, it's the same institution. And Henry Kissinger had been a member of this. Back in the days of Eisenhower, when it was set up, Vannevar Bush was one of the members of it in a scientific technical side. Vannevar Bush is the guy who was responsible for the stealing of all of Tesla's papers in 1940.
Is he connected with the rest of the Bushes?
No, different Bush family.
Okay.
So, anyway, if it's the case that Henry Kissinger was MJ1, or even if he was just a member of the MJ-12, what does that tell you about the ethos of this organization or the lack thereof? You know that Dick Cheney was a central commander of the 9/11 operation. On the morning of 9/11, Dick Cheney, he lied about at what time he arrived at the Pentagon. According to the testimony of Norman Mineta, the Secretary of Transportation to the 9/11 Commission, when he arrived at the Pentagon bunker, Dick Cheney was already there, much earlier than he had testified to being there. And there was a young officer who kept running back and forth to Dick Cheney, basically informing him that, sir, the object is 75 miles in closing. Sir, the object is now 50 miles in closing. Do the orders still stand? And Cheney barked at this guy, of course the order still stands. Do you hear me say otherwise? So he issued a stand-down order that allowed whatever object that was to impact the Pentagon. I don't think it was an airplane. It was some kind of missile.
What was the source for that particular information?
Norman Mineta, then Secretary of Transportation, in his testimony to the 9/11 Commission. He witnessed the whole thing himself. Anyway, so Dick Cheney basically fleeced the American occupation of Iraq through Halliburton contracts in order to tremendously enrich himself at the cost of the blood of, how many thousands of American soldiers who shouldn't have been dying there in the first place, and, countless Iraqis. So this is the kind of guy running the UFO reverse engineering projects and developing, black propulsion projects in the United States. What does that tell you about the ethos of the deep state? And then you get testimony like from the, who was that Marine recently? His name is escaping me, who came out and told the story about how he was with a unit in Indonesia in the early 2000s, and Michael Herrera. He was with a unit in Indonesia after the earthquake, that horrible earthquake and tsunami. And they had actually been sent to retrieve members of President Obama's family who were still there. So there were a special ops unit sent for that purpose. And Herrera said that his unit of Marines basically happened upon a flying saucer in the middle of the jungle of Indonesia with a sort of like octagonal design. And this saucer came down over a platform that was being serviced by a bunch of trucks with these storage containers on the top of them. And the people manning these trucks and monitoring the deposit of whatever assets it was onto the platform for the saucer were Black Ops guys with no identifying insignia who spoke American English and who pointed their guns at these Marines. They disarmed a group of Marines, okay? And he said, by the way, they also had tech that was like way ahead of our tech. It was like they had stuff that we have now back then.
So what happened with Maduro, would it be similar to what these guys were up to?
Something like that. I would say a lower level of that.
Okay.
So, but point being this, is that Michael Herrera eventually learns that what was in those containers were children who were being smuggled from rural Indonesia to deep underground facilities in the United States, because at a certain point, the American deep state realized that the psionically adept children that they need to pilot these saucers are best smuggled from the third and fourth world rather than, somehow coercively enlisted from out of the American population, because the latter would be manifestly illegal. Which, by the way, they used to do that. They used to use Bluebird and whatever precursors to MK Ultra to take American kids and, enlist them into these black projects.
Is this also connected to the Finders cult? And things of that
all
nature?
of that, the child trafficking in the United States. People talk about Epstein.
Yeah.
I mean, what Epstein did is peanuts compared to what these people are doing.
Wait, so this would be like a combination of, these horrible, super wealthy people having their ways as well as psychic training.
Right.
Like both at the same
Right.
time? Or did they discriminate against, all right, this person goes here, this kid goes here, this kid goes there?
I think that there are cases early on where it looks like they did work with the kids of well-connected, wealthy people, because those were the connections that they had, and they were able to recruit young people from out of those families. But probably they realized at a certain point that it was a liability, and that it's better to find kids that won't be missed from poor parts of the world. And what they do is, as Herrera testified, they make deals with their families. Their families are so impoverished that they basically convince the families to sell their children to the American deep state in exchange for a better life. And they promise them that, the kids will be well taken care of, and meanwhile the family will be taken care of, and so forth. All right, anyway, my point is this, that going back to your question.
Yeah.
One could certainly argue that what's going on here is Deva worship, and that these people are directly in league with the Devas, and that they essentially represent what we see in the Mahabharata and Ramayana, where Devas made deals with certain Rajas in various feudal kingdoms of India to give them a certain degree of technology so that they would act as local viceroys and proxies for the Devas, so the Devas don't have to manage everything directly. That's one interpretation. Another interpretation, which I think is somewhat valid, if you look at how the Collins elite, a group of theocrats who are informally spread across various intelligence agencies, including the various military intelligence agencies, Air Force intelligence, naval intelligence, also CIA, and a bunch of them in the Defense Department. This Collins elite group of, mostly evangelical Christians who are convinced the UFO phenomenon is demonic,
Their view of majestic of the MJ-12 group is that the MJ-12 group is somehow in league with the devil, that they've made a Faustian bargain to empower the United States, right? Now, if that's the case, one might argue that the American deep state is trying to develop the capacity to resist the Devas and at some point stage some kind of a rebellion. Over the past 3-4 months or so, I was exploring that idea and developing a project that would basically ask the question of whether there was anyone with any integrity and real ethos in this organization who could be convinced to adopt a blueprint, a proposal for reintegration of the deep state or the breakaway back into the United States, so that the power that they've amassed since 1947 could again become, in a legitimate sense, American power. Okay? But when you look at a figure like Dick Cheney, you really have to wonder whether that's the case. And when you look at, what Herrera witnessed, you have to ask yourself whether these people have operated as a crime syndicate for so long that they've become criminals and that they really have no ethos left whatsoever. And my bottom line is this. If these people, with their significant control over the agenda of the intelligence agencies in this country, usually from the deputy director level of the organizations, if with their capacity to manipulate the intelligence policy of the United States, they decide to make a deal with the Islamic Republic and leverage the massacre of thousands of Iranians for the sake of cutting some kind of nuclear deal or whatever, some kind of a deal to keep Iran crippled, humiliated, retarded, against the will of the vast majority of the Iranian people, then I take that as evidence that the thesis that these people have been reduced to nothing but a crime syndicate is correct. And that if they're not directly working with the Devas, they might as well be, because they're so corrupt that the Devas are going to use their corruption as an argument for reinstituting a traditionalist hierarchical world order. They're going to say, you see what happens at the end of the Kali Yuga? This is the kind of scum that rises. And we're here to cleanse the earth. And don't worry, we're going to bring the new golden age and set everything back into its proper order. Now, who would stand against that? Iran. Because from the perspective of that hierarchical, traditionalist, caste order, Iran represents the satanic. It represents the adversary. It represents what in Western terms you would call a Promethean rebellion. And, that's been the gospel of Zarathustra and the founding charter, essentially, of Iranian civilization for the last 3,000 years.
Yeah. Do you think that the people who are on the ground right now, the brave people that are fighting against their regime, do you think that they will ultimately be successful? And if so, how long would it take?
I do. And I say that because no regime can continue when it lacks even a minimal sociological basis, right? So the Islamic Republic has been completely defeated on the level of Iranian society. It really has no social basis. And you saw that, even I was surprised, having been someone who was involved in the Iranian opposition in a formal way for, 20 years now, something like this. I got involved in 2009 as a human rights activist lobbying the United Nations Security Council to impose sanctions on the IRGC during the 2009-2010 uprising, where Barack Hussein Obama betrayed the Iranian people by making a deal with the regime while the Iranian people were in the street chanting, Obama, Obama, either you're with them or you're with us. Okay, so that was the first horrendous betrayal of the Iranian people in the years since they've been trying to resist the regime. Of course, the worst betrayal of the Iranian people by America was the creation of this regime, which was a CIA project, CIA and MI6 project, and we can come back to that. But in any case, in the 20 years of my involvement in the opposition, I would not have imagined that in the cities of Qom and Mashhad, you would have people chanting, "Death to Khamenei," burning seminaries down, and of course, chanting the most popular slogan, which is, "Long live the king," and Pahlavi will return. Qom is the most important Shiite seminary city from out of which all the religious scholars of Iran emerge. And Mashhad is the most holy Shiite site inside the borders of Iran. Najaf and Karbala in Iraq are more significant Shiite holy sites, but the one that's in Iran that is like, the Mecca of Shiism is Mashhad, where you have the shrine of Imam Reza. So the fact that the two supposedly most religious Shia cities in Iran were as vehemently opposed to this regime as the rest of the country, tens and tens of cities, by the way. I mean, we've had massive protests in Iran, 2009, 2010, 2017 into 2018, when I was most involved and, helped design a plot for a coup d'etat inside Iran. And then 2022 to 23, we had the Women Life Freedom movement. But at no point did it reach the level where like 50, 60 cities and small towns all across Iran are chanting the same slogans and have the same objective. And by the way, at no point were the protests so badly disregarded by the international media as they have been this time. So anyway, do I think that they have a chance? Absolutely, because the regime has no sociological basis left. Also, the regime is functionally crippled. I don't think that they can manage the country anymore. Even if Trump pumps money into this regime, there are so many disaffected people within the civil service of this regime that probably within 2 to 3 years from now, there's going to be some other cause for a mass uprising. And there's also a certain tipping point that takes place psychologically for people where, they become so deeply disenchanted with something that it loses its grip on them on the level of fear for their lives, right? I mean, there's a kind of, there's a Persian expression, as Jan gozashte. It's like having left this world behind. It's like a kind of almost transcendental gaze, like a kind of 1,000 yard stare, that happens in a person when they reach a certain psychological tipping point. And that's happened in Iran. That's happened over the last 2 weeks. There's no going back from that. So eventually, this regime will collapse and or be overthrown. The important question is this: how many people and what countries in the next 2 to 3 years, if God's forbid the Islamic Republic lasts that long, decide to continue to stand against the will of the Iranian people and in some way negotiate with, accommodate, and empower these tyrants who have, massacred and tortured people over, not just the past 2 weeks, but over the past, 47 years. I mean, there have been mass executions in Iran going back to the 1980s of thousands of people. Every time there was an uprising, these 4 major uprisings that I mentioned, people were not only shot dead in the streets as they are now, but they were also taken to torture chambers and just, raped and brutalized in the most horrendous manner. I mean, they would, and they're doing this again now, they would ask parents to pay for each bullet put into the bodies of their children before they're allowed to retrieve their corpses. Otherwise, the kids will wind up being shoveled into a mass grave. So this is the regime you're dealing with. And if, like Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and company, you want to continue to deal with such a regime, well, then you're complicit in the crime they're committing against the Iranian people. And I can guarantee you that Iran will emerge from this not just politically, but as a country that's undergoing already a cultural renaissance and revival. And going back to what I said earlier, if this geophysical event takes place, it's also going to be one of the countries that suffers the least and is most well-positioned to project force. So whoever is standing against the will of the Iranian people today is making a grave mistake and, miscalculating in terms of, the long-term course of events.
So, Jason, before we get to Q&A, I want to ask you the following. So, the more I've been doing the stream, the more I've noticed that just speaking with people who are in some sense having a position of power, they seem to be within particular social circles that reinforce each other. I mean, that's obvious. And the question is, how much of an effect could one have in steering people towards something that they may not have even entertained? So, for example, if we're talking about the theologists of the Collins elite, well, what if we're talking about the Peter theologists? You know what I mean?
Right.
What if we're talking about some of these dark Enlightenment people that, again, like from my experience, I've had Curtis Yarvin on the show, obviously. These are people who see a lot of problems heading our way and want to figure out the best way to address those problems. Like, I'm not seeing malevolence when it comes to a lot of the people who I speak with here. And I'm also seeing almost this nostalgia for what would be considered to be the Aristotelian good life.
Yeah.
So when it comes to people like that, do you think that there can be arguments that can be made and bring them out of whatever social circles are not doing a great service for the sake of the future here?
Well, the problem is that this Aristotelian discourse of the good life has been misappropriated by conservative forms of Christianity, mainly by the Catholic Church, but also these days increasingly by evangelicals. And Peter Thiel in particular, as I've, come out with in social media, I happen to know from my conversations with people in intelligence, Peter Thiel is running the Collins elite. He is the current head of the Collins elite. So when you see Peter Thiel hold these seminars about the Antichrist,
Yeah.
this is not like an isolated intellectual exercise, okay? It's part of an agenda which is being felt very strongly in Silicon Valley, where Peter Thiel is trying to encode all technological development, especially with a view to the singularity, to encode it all with a Christian value system, right? And to argue that basically in order to survive the advancement of technology toward the singularity, we need something like a Christian theocracy. So that's the agenda of the Collins elite. And they see the UFO phenomenon in terms of a battle between angels and demons. And so it's not at all surprising to me that J.D. Vance, who is effectively a tool of Peter Thiel, he has no real autonomy politically. He was put into the Trump administration by Peter Thiel, and he was created really by Peter Thiel. J.D. Vance from the beginning was a project of Peter Thiel. I know people personally who watched that happen. So it's no surprise to me that J.D. Vance is the main person whispering in Trump's ear, we should negotiate with the Islamic Republic. We should leverage the massacre of all these Iranians to finally get a good nuclear deal with the Islamic Republic, remove sanctions off of them, and allow their economy to recover and so forth. Because Peter Thiel wants a theocratic Iran. Because the Collins elite are Christians, very much like Tucker Carlson. I mean, Tucker Carlson is a mouthpiece of the Collins elite. Whether he realizes it or not, he may be doing it naively, but he's a useful idiot for them. And so very much in the vein of Tucker Carlson's discourse, these types of Christians think that a devout Muslim society is better than a heathen society, better than a secular modern society. And so the last thing they want to see is Iran become a secular bastion of anti-religious progressive modernism, right? They would be terrified of that. They would prefer, intellectual, pseudo-intellectual mullahs that they can have conversations with about the threat that the Antichrist poses collectively to all the virtuous people of the world.
The perennialist chestnut, in other words.
Exactly. It's a perennialist agenda, and this is why, Thiel is also constantly, consorting with Diana Pasulka, and basically has been using Diana Pasulka as a conduit to also negotiate with the Jesuit order in the Vatican to create some kind of a détente or maybe even collaboration between the Collins elite evangelicals and the Tradcaths.
Well, that kind of brings us to someone like Nick Fuentes, for instance. Do you see people like that as just being useful idiots, or do you see them being much more tightly managed, controlled when it comes to things like he was on the no-fly list and he was off the no-fly list? I don't know. I don't know how much of this is just...
I don't think that Nick Fuentes is directly managed by anybody, but there are things you can do to someone so that you craft an appropriate biography for a person who would be very useful. So I would say he falls in the useful idiot category, but I wouldn't be surprised if some of the things that were done to him along the way were meant to unfold and shape a certain biography and a certain psychology that would then prove to be useful for them.
One quick aside, I don't want to focus on the guy too much, but he himself said that he's a test tube baby.
Yeah.
And it does make me wonder, not specifically looking at him, but how many of the influencers that are around us today are the result of something that's much more carefully planned. Like, I know you guys aren't going to believe me. I'm not planned by anybody. There is nobody who has set me up to be in this position. This is just, I don't know why I'm here. I don't know why this is happening. It's just pure craziness. But I don't know about the rest. Like, for example, I'm not saying Joe Rogan has been planted, but I definitely know that there are people around him who have been influencing the guy. Just as a quick example, we have, and this is something that Ben Avery has said publicly, so I can, say it publicly as well now. When he had Lex Friedman on, they were having dinner with him and Tim Dillon and Ben Avery. Lex Friedman could not stop complimenting Vladimir Putin, how wonderful Vladimir Putin is. And next thing I know, I see Joe Rogan talking about this thing that he saw on Russian TV. All of a sudden, like, what? Where did he get that from? So, like Mike David of Red Bar, love that show, by the way, how he gave a warning to Joe. He said, Joe, they're all in on it. The guy who gives you your mail, the guy who sells you your bow and arrows, like, they're all trying to convince you to do a particular thing. And it's like, it's true, but how much of that isn't just people who are trying to sell products? How much of that is actually trying to sell the public on a certain mindset?
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
And with that, we're going to go to Super Chats. But before that, I have a very special Super Chat that I have to let you guys know about 100%, which is from King of Biltong. Biltong is one of the highest protein snacks in the world, boasting nearly 50% protein, packed with B vitamins, creatine, iron, zinc, and more. Visit biltongusa.com and use code word BTR for 10% off. And guys, we have the Biltong right over here. These are the Biltong sticks. No relation to Sticks Hexenhammer 666. Shout out to him, a friend of the show. But these are really good. These are some of my favorite. I really love like the fatty parts, like when they still have the animal fat on them, as well as, the classic Biltong as well. And also the, my favorite are probably, it's a toss-up between the cabanassi, the sausages, and also the drawers, who have this nice snap to them when you eat them. So, guys, help out the show. Go to biltongusa.com. From the bottom of my heart, I really appreciate everybody who's been contributing and growing this thing, including, by the way, all the patrons over here. Guys, thank you guys so much for being here. You guys make the show possible. And for those who don't know like exactly how this is supposed to work, if you give $20 or more for Patreon, you get to actually be here in New York City in the studio in person watching this amazing show. And later on, we're going to go to a nice Japanese place and drink some sake and have a good time. So you guys, and we also have a rooftop for the summertime as well. So if you guys want to be a part of that, patreon.com/breaktherules, become a patron today. And I guarantee you that you are helping build the foundations for what is the greatest intellectual project. I mean, with Dr. Jason Reza Jorjani here, like, how could you doubt the fact that what we're building right now is very special, very important, and it's not in any of these bias camps where everybody has to go according to a script. Like, I could disagree with Jason, and I disagree with a lot of my guests, and I think that's an important thing. And that's why we're going to keep on building up this intellectual powerhouse thanks to your guys' help. So just before the super chats, I just want to get that out. And yeah, let's go to the super chats, everybody. So here we go. From Reptilia222. And of course, by the way, we're going to be doing the audience questions as well. So let's do 2 super chats and then audience questions. Here we go. Hi, Jason. What can a common person of modest means do to position themselves to have access to singularity level technology when the spectral revolution happens?
You would have to move to the place in the world where you think that the governing authorities are going to allow the most widespread access to that technology, right? So I'm wording that carefully for a reason. We could be in a world 20 years from now where not all of the governing authorities in the world are governments in the sense in which we understand them today. There could be corporate-controlled technology acceleration zones that are managed in a different way from a conventional representative government. And, you would want to find out where it is that those places would arise and how to be a part of them. Or if there are certain governments in a more conventional sense that are likely to share that technology with a larger percentage of the population and not sequester it, you would want to place yourself in those countries, right? Obviously, I think that Iran is one of them. I think that the majority of the world, which subscribes to some form of deva worship, is going to be coerced into some neo-feudal hierarchical caste society where the vast majority of people will be denied access to singularity level technologies. So the question becomes, what parts of the world will be an exception to that? And again, there may be little pockets that are exceptions, which are like Singapore-style technology acceleration zones, not like where Singapore is, because that'll be underwater. But then there may be other, like, more robust, nations in the true sense of the word, not just in the political sense, where there's a sufficient ethos and internal cohesion and integrity and a will to progress and, discovery and innovation that's shared by a broad enough portion of the population, and where a large enough portion of the population is integrally bound by an ethos that's organic and doesn't have to be imposed from above. So, Japan might be another example of that. If the Japanese don't get taken in by this hierarchical deva system, and one way in which they might resist it is from out of their Buddhist heritage.
Already, by the way, in Japanese airlines, there was a post I saw about them saying that they're not serving halal food.
Yes, none of their food is halal. Yeah. I reposted that, and I said that I foresee the future Iran and Japan being great allies.
Well, that's good. We'll make anime real. So next super chat over here, which, by the way, like, we could have a whole stream about anime.
By the way, I don't think that Iran Air's food is going to be halal either.
There we go. No, that's good. Okay, next one over here from Jeff Golden 238. Jason, and this is for $30, by the way. Thank you so much. Jason, have you read the book The Bear: History of a Fallen King by Michael Pastore, or looked into the subject of ancient Ursus cults among Pi people, Proto-Indo-European people, more broadly? What significance do you grant them, if any?
So I have not read the book that he mentions, but I have studied that subject, and I granted a tremendous amount of significance. The bear constellations, the Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, as they circle the pole over the course of the year, form the shape of the swastika. And this is one of the reasons why the swastika was such an important symbol to the Aryans, euphemistically referred to as the Indo-European peoples. And so the bear became an important astrological symbol for the Indo-European peoples. Because, as they call it in Iran, Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, the form of swastika, are the wheel of Mithra, or the handle of Mithra, where Mithra, when he ascends out above the terrestrial plane and grabs a hold of the celestial sphere to break the chains of fate over humanity, he grabs the celestial sphere by this wheel of Mithra, namely by the swastika. It's like one of these
steering wheel, yeah.
Yeah, steering like in a submarine or whatever, right? And so that's a very important symbol, and the bear was important in that regard. And then Artemis, the huntress, whose symbol is a swastika, because swastikas were used as good luck symbols, good fortune symbols in hunting, which is why, by the way, the chase bank, shasa, means the hunt. Their symbol is a swastika, stylized swastika, because swastikas were used for good fortune in hunting. And so Artemis, the huntress, is also associated with bears. Mm-hmm. And there are correlate deities to Artemis in other Indo-European cultures, like the Celtic culture, where, in the Celtic culture, their version of Artemis was called Artio. And she was depicted as shapeshifting between a bear and a person, Artio. Okay, so, yeah, the bear is a very important Indo-European symbol.
And now we're going to go to super chats from our lovely audience over here. So I got the microphone. Who wants to go first? Anybody? Okay, here we go. Come here. There you go, Mr. Mullen.
Thank you.
There we go. And now let me switch the view. 1 second. Here we go.
Should I be standing in a particular spot?
Let me see. Yeah, keep going a little bit more here. And by the way, while this is happening, make sure to smash that like button, smash that subscribe button, stand in a little bit more over here so your neck is not cut off. A teensy more. There we go. The light is in your face, but it's okay. Let me just adjust one thing. This wire, it really shouldn't be here. There we go. Let me just bring it around town like that. Hopefully it'll stay. There we are. Okay, there we go, Mr. Mullen. You are illuminated. You can go ahead, sir.
Sweet. So, Jason, I wanted to ask you about your UFO thesis, getting away from politics and Thanosis and all of that, because while I find it super fascinating, I think there's like a glaring hole. Where are the reptilians, man? I've only seen you comment about them as a speculation that they might have been some, earlier genetic experiment prior to humans. But that's all I've heard you say about it. I feel like I'm fairly familiar with your corpus at this point. Yet in ufology at large, they occupy a tremendously important spot. Like many, I would say probably, overall of ufology, they are like the top spot, like above even the Mantids and the Nordics. They dominate the DMT space. They are, reputedly shapeshifters that sometimes take the form of our, Nordics. And they're like the royal family, according to satanic ritual abuse survivors and stuff. So, what's the deal with the reptilians? I would really like to hear you go in depth as to what their role is in your whole thesis.
Well, unfortunately, I have to confess to you, the reason that I don't talk about them very much is that I am one of them. So it's very impolitic, for me to give them too much attention. No, but in all seriousness, have you read Closer Encounters? Okay. So in the section of Closer Encounters where I'm talking about evidence for genetic modification of the human race and how the Sumerian myths talk about the Anunnaki having experimented with a number of different slave races before they decided on a form that was very close to them, namely humanity, I advanced the speculation that, okay, now we need another important line of evidence here, and that's that I lay out the case at length in Closer Encounters that there was a human civilization on Mars about more than 100 million years before the present. And that human civilization on Mars constructed the moon, both as a spaceship and space station and also as a terraforming device to render the Earth's biosphere habitable to humans. And when would they have come here and done that? Well, the time of the dinosaurs. So I speculate, and some of the remote viewers have also said that they've seen this, that the dinosaurs were basically deliberately killed off. They did not haphazardly go extinct from some random asteroid impact. The dinosaurs were killed off as part of a terraforming of Earth to render it habitable for humanoids who came from Mars. So when you look at that and you look at the various hybridization and genetic modification programs that the UFO entities are involved with, and you look at the Sumerian accounts of various failed attempts at a slave race that they engineered that were not as humanoid as we are, it stands to reason that the reptilians may be a failed earlier attempt at a subordinate species designed by these Nordic-looking overlords. And that they didn't just kill the dinosaurs off, they used dinosaur DNA to develop a hybrid reptilian humanoid species, which they tried and failed to use as a slave race. One of the things that you see, first of all, I would dispute your characterization of the reptilians being so significant in the close encounter literature. They're there. And the cases that we get of reptilians are very disturbing. They involve rape and various kinds of abuse. And so, if one wanted to speculate about why the reptilians hate humans so much, it would make sense if they came from out of a human Frankenstein's laboratory and were discarded as an unsuccessful slave race, they would have an axe to grind against humanity. And also, I agree with you, that the evidence supports the fact that these creatures have found a way to get into the DMT realm. Just like we get into the DMT space, the reptilians apparently found a way to get into the DMT space, and they're there. So they're a thing. But I don't see them being dominant. I see them being a kind of like underground, hidden, like embattled, underground, fortified remnant of something that is tremendously resentful and is sort of like clawing its way to hanging on to some kind of a life for itself. When the remote viewers look at what's going on in the moon and they look at what's going on in Antarctica, it's not the reptilians who are managing, let's say, the afterlife process that I talk about in Thanosis. It's tall, beautiful, Nordic-looking people. So, and then also there are these narratives about how the Nordics are going to save us from the evil reptilians and all this shit, right? Well, this also maps very easily onto the idea that they were a discarded earlier slave race. Because if you were the, Frankenstein's laboratory engineers who created these unfortunate entities, you would want to spin this narrative that, oh, they're evil and satanic and like we're going to come, we beautiful angelic Nordic people are going to come protect you from them, right? Whereas maybe, they're just pissed off. And maybe we could come to some modus vivendi with them, once we get rid of the Nordic overlords. Who knows? We could sit down with the reptilians and come to an understanding. Could be. You never know.
Imagine in the mid-period, it'll be like Biggie, Tupac, a gangsta, like a reptilian gangster rap. You know what I mean? Like, as they're going into our culture.
But by the way, let me point out one other thing. And I discovered this after I wrote Closer Encounters. So I didn't make this argument there, but I could have. Apparently, when you talk to paleontologists and geneticists, they will explain to you why the reptilian that's described in Close Encounter reports is not a viable, organically evolved life form. Something like a dinosaur would not wind up looking that humanoid. It has to be a genetically engineered hybrid, which again suggests to me that they were developed by somebody else.
Yeah. And
I don't think they're the Archons. I think that all the evidence... By the Archons, exactly. Developed and then discarded by the Archons. Yeah.
And much like we were talking before about the shamanistic abilities of the Japanese people, what do you have in Pokemon? You have this creature, Mewtwo, who is this genetically altered, Pokemon. I know it's like kid stuff, but at the same time, I think that a lot of kids' entertainment in Japan really narrows into a lot of these mythological things.
I certainly used to be in the era of anime in the 80s and the 90s. I mean, I've written about it in Prometheus and Atlas and other books of mine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to, does anybody have, here we go. Okay, let's see. Grab the mic. And now I'm going to take a look here. Keep going a little bit more to the left, and maybe a little bit forward just so the light isn't that much on your face. All right, that's the best we can do. All right, good.
So I'm like halfway through my third of your book, so you'll forgive me if you addressed this somewhere that I haven't read yet.
Which one?
I started with Thanosis, and then I did Satanayan, and now I'm sort of reading Prometheus and Closer Encounters kind of in parallel. I actually just read today the part that you mentioned, you brought up about the reptilians, but which makes total sense, by the way. It always bothered me that why they looked humanoid as well. Do you? I was wondering about, given the close textual analysis you do of biblical passages, if you had anything to say, whether it's relevant to exactly what we were discussing today or not, the on Cain and Abel story, because that's another clear part in Genesis where, at least from my opinion, it's been clearly, the text has been excised. It says Cain said to his brother Abel, ... And then when they were in the field, he took a rock and killed him. It's clear, it's they translate it as, he spoke to his brother Abel, or they were talking, but it really clearly says in the Hebrew, he said to his brother Abel, and then it just goes, and then he killed him. So is there maybe something there as with your knowledge of comparative religion?
There were romantic poets and writers of the 18th century, like in the era of Byron, who made a lot out of the symbol of Cain as a representative of the Luciferian.
There's a mark.
Yeah, and that God's judgment in favor of Abel and against Cain is like another example of the injustice of Yahweh.
And also Cain's descendants are some of the first to make weapons and things. So I wonder if there's a polemical aspect with regard to some of this conflict.
And this connects it exactly to what I was about to say. Which is that it's another example of what we see with Genesis 6 on the Book of Enoch, where in the Book of Enoch, among the things we're told that the rebel angels teach humanity before Yahweh decides to wipe this super civilization off the face of the earth in Noah's flood, is the development of weaponry so that humanity can resist the Elohim. And so that connects it directly to the Cain story.
Right, it means that whoever interpolated that part into the Cain story was the same person possibly who took out the...
Yes, and so what you're suggesting, I think very rightly, is that there could be a Cain and Abel story equivalent to the Book of Enoch, that there's some missing text, which in case of Genesis 6, we found in the Ethiopian, Ethiopian Judaism, we found that, and we may yet find it. I'll tell you where it is. You know where it is? The fucking Vatican Library is where it is.
Probably, yeah. Thank you.
Now we're going to go to more super chats over here. Once again, to super chats, and that gives you guys the opportunity to think of another question here. Now, this next person, I think you had certain interactions with him before, not of a pleasant variety, but he seems to ask in good faith. His name is Iran Talk. I don't know if you've heard of Iran Talk.
Oh, don't take his question.
No? All right, there we go. Look, I proposed, and anyway.
Did that guy actually try to pay you money?
Yeah, he paid me 20.
Well, he can shove it up his
bucks.
ass. Next question.
Okay. Look, what are you gonna do?
Next question.
Хозяин барин, that's a Russian expression. Anyway. Okay. Machik, 57, $20. Lev, you are a lucky man to know JRJ in person. Grateful for your channel. Успехов с Новым годом. Thank you very much. That was a Russian success for New Year. Well, thank you very much, Machika57. I appreciate that. And once again, if you guys want to support the show, patreon.com/breaktherules. Become a patron today. Anyway, next one over here, we have Lady Ariana. Greetings, Dr. Jorjani. Why do you think Pahlavi hasn't met Trump yet? And do you know someone who could set up a meeting between them? Ariana.
So 3 days ago, the news that was being reported was, Trump basically straight up said this on Air Force One, that he did not think it was appropriate for him to meet with Reza Pahlavi in the guise of President of the United States, which we all found horrendously insulting in the Iranian opposition, and very reminiscent of how he snubbed Machado as potential leader of Venezuela because, she was awarded the Nobel Prize that he wanted. Right?
And also she's a nice person, which you were saying before
exactly,
he doesn't like.
Exactly. And then, he corrected himself when Machado decided she's going to share the Nobel Prize with Trump. And so now he's going to actually meet with her. Okay? So Trump, I don't know, I don't want to speculate what caused the change of mind, but Laura Loomer is reporting that now a meeting has finally been set up between Trump and Reza Pahlavi at Mar-a-Lago on Tuesday. Will be tomorrow, right? We'll see if that actually takes place. I don't envy the Crown Prince's position because, frankly, to go into a meeting with Donald Trump after he said that he's going to give the regime a slap on the wrist with a brief military strike, a limited military strike, but then sit at a negotiating table with them, right, over the bodies of all of these massacred Iranian protesters. I don't envy the Crown Prince going into a meeting like that. Frankly, if I were him, and this is why I'm not him, I wouldn't take the meeting from the side of Reza Pahlavi. I would not sit with somebody who was even considering negotiating with the Islamic Republic. Okay, so I don't envy him in the position that he's in. But then again, this is why he's the man for the job under these current conditions, because he'll do something like that. And somebody has to. So I'm sure that if Reza Pahlavi gets that meeting with Trump at Mar-a-Lago tomorrow, he's going to try to make the case to him as best he can that he should not sit down with any official of the Islamic Republic, nor delegate any of his administration, officials to do so. Right as of now, the meeting is supposed to take place. We'll see, within the next 24, 48 hours whether it does, and whether Reza Pahlavi can prevail upon Trump not to engage in negotiations with the Islamic Republic. Now, I will say this. Again, I'm a person who was the harshest critic of Reza Pahlavi in the entire Iranian opposition a number of years ago because, a number of us thought that he was not patriotic enough and that his policies were not ultimately in the long-term national interest of Iran. That having been said, as I explained, under the current conditions, he's emerged as the most practical representative of the Iranian people, both domestically and in the international community. If Donald Trump and his team, Vance and so forth, make a deal with the Islamic Republic and they artificially inject another 3 years of life into this regime, so that, let's say, instead of by the way, before Trump said that he would make a deal with this regime, I would have given this regime another 6 weeks. Another 6 weeks. That's it. That's how close to collapse it is. It's very significant that the anniversary of the founding of the Islamic Republic is on February 11th. And usually they like to hold huge street demonstrations celebrating the Islamic Republic. So if February 11th were to come around and they have still completely lost control of the streets and there are mass demonstrations against them, that basically is a point past which they cannot recover, okay? So I would have said you had 6 weeks left. Now, if they make a deal with the Islamic Republic and artificially inject another, let's say, 3 years of life into this regime, one thing I can tell you, and I'm going to get a lot of flack for this, is that Reza Pahlavi won't be leading Iran anymore. Reza Pahlavi can lead Iran if there's a transition now, or in the next 6 months, or in the next 9 months. If this regime survives this current revolution and this is crushed somehow with the facilitation and collaboration of the United States government, the next leadership of a national revolution in Iran will be far more radical than Reza Pahlavi. He will be sidelined. He will not be the one determining the future of Iran if the regime changes in 2029 or 2032.
And by radical, you don't mean authoritarian, totalitarian?
I think it will be authoritarian insofar as it will have an absolutely non-negotiable will to crush Islam. It will be authoritarian in terms of resolving any issues of Iran's strategic national interest economically. Like, let me give you a couple of examples.
Sure.
And these are some of the reasons why the Western intelligence agencies are nervous. There's a place in the Persian Gulf called the South Pars Field. The South Pars Field, where beginning in the late 1990s, early 2000s or so, the Emir of Qatar, Al Thani, built an oil and gas extraction infrastructure, which is basically stealing Iranian energy resources from out of the South Pars Field. It's siphoning them off toward Qatar. And this is how Qatar became a wealthy country, by stealing Iranian energy resources from the South Pars Field. Then in the UAE, the Islamic Republic allows Qatar to get away with this.
Yeah.
Why? Because Qatar helps fund Hamas and various radical Islamic causes.
And also bribes all our politicians here.
And Al Jazeera is based there. And so it was useful for the Islamic Republic to collaborate with the Qatari Sultanate to basically, achieve its aims in terms of radical Islamic force projection. And they did that at the expense of the Iranian nation, okay? So one issue that's going to be resolved in an authoritarian manner is control of the South Pars Field. There's going to be a war between Iran and Qatar. Not under Reza Pahlavi. Reza Pahlavi is a business-minded man. Reza Pahlavi has this organization called National Union for Democracy in Iran, Nufti. Okay, they're a bunch of technocrats. They want to come in. They want to have good business with everybody.
Yeah, they want to be nifty.
Yeah, nifty in crafting business deals that benefit everybody in the region, right? So you're not going to get that under him. But if the Islamic Republic lasts for another 3 years or so, a different group of people will come in, and they will resolve that through war with Qatar, and Qatar will be decimated. There won't be a country there. Not only will there be no business, there won't be a country there, okay? And by the way, America should consider what it wants to do with Al Udeid base, because its base is in Qatar. If they want to support the Islamic Republic to last another few years, I strongly suggest they ought to leave Qatar before Iranian troops arrive there. The second issue is that there are 3 islands at the mouth of the Persian Gulf, just inside the Strait of Hormuz. So the Strait of Hormuz is a vital energy chokehold of the world, where all the oil and gas that comes in and out of the Persian Gulf has to pass through this narrow strait. And Iranian naval power essentially controls that strait, but also vital to management of the Strait of Hormuz are these 3 islands just inside the Persian Gulf called the Greater and Lesser Tonbs and Abu Musa. And these islands belong to Iran historically. They've always been part of Iran. And they're vital from a naval control standpoint, and they're also potential places of economic development. Like you could build seasteads around these islands, and all kinds of interesting offshore technological development could take place there as like relatively unregulated economic and tech development zones. Like I talked about technology acceleration zones earlier, right? So these islands are very important. Now, the UAE has asserted some ridiculous claim over these islands. UAE, which is a fake country, by the way. United Arab Emirates is not even a country. I mean, it's a fake entity.
Every time you say fake country, we have to have a drinking game in the future.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll all wind up drunk. Because anyway. So the emirs in Dubai and Abu Dhabi are trying to assert a claim over these islands. And I'm very concerned that if there's chaos and disorder and a kind of functional collapse of the Iranian central government, that they will use that opportunity to move and seize these islands, naval force. So if another more authoritarian nationalist regime were to come to power in Iran, certainly the issue of the 3 islands will be resolved decisively, and Dubai will be leveled to the ground. Okay? So all these people who invested all this money into this fucking Arab Las Vegas, just understand that if you go against the will of the Iranian people today, if this regime collapses 3 years from now, you're going to be dealing with an Iranian leadership that will level Dubai to the ground. as part of a war to seize those 3 islands. They should also consider that.
One follow-up question I just want to ask regarding that, since you mentioned Dubai and Qatar. It seems like on the internet right now, Kunli Trunkpa, which I don't know if you guys know who that is. It's a very interesting account, a British guy, I believe, who travels all around the world. He really likes these particular governments just in terms of they're very efficient. It's very easy. They don't harass you with Islam and Sharia law and any of that stuff. It just seems like you could
Dubai.
Dubai, you could do business there. And it seems like some people, and I'm not saying he assumes this, but I know for a fact that a lot of people do, that this is the way we can de-Islamize the Middle East.
No. Okay, I'll tell you exactly what Dubai is.
Okay.
Same with Qatar. You know how China never turned Hong Kong into a communist economic system? Right?
Yeah.
When the Chinese got Hong Kong back from the British in 1997, they made the very shrewd decision not to integrate Hong Kong into the Chinese communist economic system. They preserved it as a relatively autonomous capitalist cash cow for communist China. Dubai and Qatar are exactly that for the larger Islamic Caliphate project. They are false front capitalist investment schemes that are pumping money ultimately into a jihadist project, which is building mosques all over European cities.
Would the same go for somebody like MBS, for instance, in Saudi Arabia?
The thing with him and his little power clique is that they have no grassroots support in their society. And I predict, and mark my words, that when the convergent catastrophes begin to unfold, both the catastrophic sea level rise and also other, like an EMP event, they have this plan to build this NEOM.
Yeah,
right?
The wall.
How do you, first of all, that's not high enough above sea level. Number one, the waves are going to smash it. Number two, how's that going to work out after an EMP takes out all the electricity?
Well, I could tell you how all the birds are going to fly on it, and there'll be plenty of meat, bird meat for people to eat.
Exactly. So it's a mirage in the desert. The Salafist Wahhabi culture of Saudi Arabia has not organically, sprouted this MBS shit, okay? It is a Western, superficial, topical, global capital transplant onto Saudi Arabia. And it's not going to survive catastrophe. And again, this is why Iran is so important. The Iranian society, first of all, look, we're dealing with a country that died 5 times and came back to life. Okay, Iran was invaded by the Greeks. It was invaded by the Romans. It was invaded by the Arabs. It was overrun by Turks and ultimately brutally conquered by Mongols. And not only did the country come back, it came back as a world empire every time. What country is like this in the world? There isn't a single other example. Italy never came back like that. Yeah. Italy had one empire, and it had a nice renaissance where, by the way, during the Italian Renaissance, there was no Italian country. There was no Italian nation. There were a bunch of disjointed, interesting little
I could only think of maybe Israel as being a close facsimile in terms of,
as a small entity, not as an imperial power with force projection. But, it's a legitimate point. So in the whole Middle East, the only 2 real countries are Iran and Israel. In the whole Middle East. The rest of them are all fake. All of them. Pakistan, fake. Turkey's fake. Jordan is fake. Iraq is completely fake. Israel is a real country. It was there in the Bible. It's there 2,500. It was there when Cyrus the Great helped to reconstruct it. Mm-hmm. So Iran and Israel are the only 2 real countries in the entire Middle East, and this is significant in terms of their future partnership. My point is that Iran is such an cohesive, integrally, organically generated and regenerative country that on the other side of the convergent catastrophes, there will be an Iran. There always has been, there will be. Saudi Arabia, not so much. Okay? So I wouldn't bet on MBS.
All right, we got some super chats, but before that, do you guys have any questions? All right, let's go to Keegan over here. Come on in. Of Grift Shop, by the way, one of my favorite online stores. Just want to give a shout out to a great
Hell yeah, thank you, bro. I was struck by a bunch of the things you said about like the United States, particularly vis-a-vis, like, well, for context, you know, I'm a heritage American. I have multiple ancestors in the Mayflower. You know, it's very important to me that our government is representative of our people here. And I wanted to like relate some things you said about both the United States government as currently constituted being a contractual republic that doesn't actually represent the actual ethos and character of the like people here, and also the breakaway deep state.
Yes.
That does not represent the interests of the people, even though they're great power. If it was reoriented back towards it, it could provide great prosperity and
Sure.
potential, you know, collective enlightenment for the people here. So I'm thinking like you know, I just want to pick your brain about how if there was a way to reorient this breakaway state back towards the interests of the land and people here, as would that be able to square the circle in making a government here that is actually like representative and true to the nature of the people that are here?
Okay, so great question, and much respect to your ancestors. First of all, when you say representative, the problem is that the vast majority of Americans are conservative Christians of one form or another, whether they're evangelicals, which is the Bible Belt, or whether they're increasingly traditionalist Catholics. The project of the founders of this country to transform America into an enlightened republic of people with a liberal-minded cosmopolitan view of the world utterly failed. Thomas Jefferson wrote to James Madison after he was president. He wrote that, listen, what we're doing here is an experiment. And if we're right about human nature, all we need to do, because also they were looking at the French Revolution, and in the French Revolution, the cult of reason literally banned Christianity and was executing priests. They were drowning them in the Seine River. Yeah. So, well, first they had the cult of reason, who were like rationalist atheists, and they were going up, you know, around breaking crosses in cemeteries and tearing all the icons out of churches like Notre Dame, and they were literally drowning priests in the Seine River. And then because that shit was so crazy and society was starting to come apart at the seams, Maximilien Robespierre created the cult of the supreme being and made everybody worship this artificial god of reason, right? So Jefferson and the founders are looking at this and they're like, oh, no, this is not good. What we have to do is we have to give people the freedom to enlighten themselves. And if we create a system with freedom of religion, freedom of speech, you know, freedom of the press, and the right to bear arms against tyrants and so on and so forth, and we have the right educational institutions arise within that society that aren't controlled by the church and that aren't overbearingly controlled by the state either, over time, people will liberate themselves from these retarded religious belief systems. This is what they thought. And by the way, they didn't like Tom Paine too much because Tom Paine just utterly trashed the Bible in his writings. And he actually went to the extent of saying, no, you guys are wrong. Christianity is fundamentally incompatible with the U.S. Constitution. And until we get rid of this religion, this experiment of liberty is dead in its cradle in this country. Okay, so they didn't like that guy either. Poor guy, none of them went to his funeral. Despite the fact that he went over to France and he fought in the French Revolution. Anyway, whatever. Look, the point is, and he's buried in New York, by the way, downtown, Tom Paine. Look, the point is this, that Jefferson wrote to Madison saying, it's an experiment. If we're right about human nature, that, you know, the grand architect of the cosmos endowed us with this inner reason, and that we're going to discover both our own nature and the nature of the cosmos, as long as we're provided with enough liberty from tyrants, then there won't be Christians in this country at all in 2 generations. This is what he writes to him. He said, in 2 generations, there won't be Christians left in this country. Everybody will be like a universalist deist, okay? And then he says to Madison, and if not, it means we were wrong about human nature and the experiment of the United States is a failure. Well, I'm sorry, but it's a failure. Okay? And so then the question becomes, okay, well, what other ethos could this country be reorganized around that is still in some way faithful to what the founders were really groping toward, and that would actually allow America to become the frontier and defender of the free world, and that's also consonant with the kind of cultural development that's taken place in this country? And the answer to that is not hard. And this is what I was going to write my book on America about. You see it in American popular culture. You see it in the superhero mythos. You see it in Star Trek and its vision of the United Federation of Planets. You see it in the Galactic Rebellion of Star Wars. Okay? You see it in the X-Men. This is the American spirit. The problem is that from a Judeo-Christian perspective, that is satanic. The one thing that Ayatollah Khomeini, the founder of the Islamic Republic of Iran, got right is that America is the great Satan. Now, actually, I think it's kind of giving America too much credit at this point, right? America could be and should have been the great Satan. The problem with your use of the word representative government, is that what it would take at this point to turn things around in this country so that that's the ethos that's determinative of political decision-making, of policy-making, would be extremely authoritarian. You would have to go up against the will of 90% of the population. And moreover, you're trusting that these deep state people who control this electrogravitic technology, who have all these advanced psionics programs, that they still have their heart in the American project, and that enough of them are going to be willing to engage and collaborate with that coup in such a manner as to ultimately reintegrate this technology into some form of American government. So, look at the list of demands there. So, your average American, supposing such a thing were even possible, your average American is 100% going to say that's the government of the Antichrist. That is the government, that Novus Ordo Seclorum, New Order of the Ages, e pluribus unum, that is the government of the Antichrist. So that's the book I was working on, actually, until this situation in Iran. And with Trump on the verge of bailing out the Islamic Republic and cutting a deal over the, massacred bodies of thousands of Iranians, I'm not writing that book anymore. I've suspended that book. Because I'm not sure I want to save America. I'll decide over the next few weeks whether this country's worth saving. Okay? We'll see.
Oh, Jason, I have a follow-up question. So when it comes to the ethos of the American, let's say the white landowners who had the ability to vote, how many of them, and I don't know if there's a way that we can know this, how many of them back in the day were of this much more libertine, or maybe just like a more liberal in the classic sense mindset of a Promethean nature?
The slave owners?
Versus being people who are, like Bible reading every day and, God-fearing. Like, was it 50-50?
No, many of them were. Listen, America has become increasingly retarded. People were much more secular in this country, even in the 1950s, let alone like back in the day. You'd be surprised if you read the literature in the era of Thomas Jefferson and Tom Paine and George Washington, and they're discussing extraterrestrial intelligence. Tom Paine, in his book on the rights of man, talks about how the American Revolution can set an example not just for the other cultures on the earth, but for all those oppressed people in space, okay, who are under various tyrannical regimes. So they had a cosmic horizon, and they were speculating over what forms of life could fill the universe that astronomy had opened up to them.
And what about people like John Edwards and the Great Awakening?
By the way, you know why that happened? Why? Oh, this is more important point is this.
Okay.
Why did that happen? Because the people who founded this country were deists mostly. They didn't believe in the Bible. They thought the Bible was horrible. Paine said it outright. The rest of them thought it privately. They hated the Bible. Thought it was disgusting. But they believed in a kind of grand architect of the universe who had embedded a moral order in the world in a very Pythagorean kind of way. And you know what shattered that? See, so as long as that was the prevailing belief system in America, which, by the way, is also embedded in Masonry, and, so many of the founders were Masons, Benjamin Franklin, George Washington himself, laid the cornerstone of the White House in his Masonic regalia. So long as they believed that about the moral order of the world, and the most rationalistic expression of this is the philosophy of Immanuel Kant, his categorical imperative and all this. You could disregard the Bible easily because you had a safety net to fall back on. We don't need the Bible. What is all this shit? He's Yahweh's sadistic. He's cruel. He's jealous. Fuck that. We believe in the grand architect of the universe. What shattered that was Darwin. The Darwinian revolution in science destroyed deism. And as someone who studied the history of parapsychology, I can tell you that there's nothing in parapsychological research, in actual empirical, tangible research about the nature of the soul and psychic abilities and, even the transition between death and rebirth. There's nothing in the mountain of empirical parapsychology data going back 150 years that refutes Darwinism. Darwin's basic insight was correct. The parts of Darwin that Nietzsche appropriated are legit. There is no universal moral order. There is no God. God is a delusion, capital G, and there is no moral order in the universe. And once you realize that, it becomes a lot harder to let go of the Bible, and most people go back and grab the Bible again. And so what you would have to do if you wanted to save the American dream is you would have to look at the various, surrealistic dream fantasies that come from out of our popular culture that produce Star Trek and Star Wars and the X-Men and so forth, not as any instantiation of some universal moral order, just as a vision of who we want to be. We're Promethean people with a Promethean spirit. These are the kind of people we want to be. We see ourselves as the X-Men. We see ourselves as the Justice League. We see ourselves as the Galactic Rebel Alliance, the United Federation of Planets. It's our ethos. It's our ethos. It's a Promethean ethos. And other people have other ethoses. They shouldn't fuck with us because if they do, they're going to get fucked. Okay? The will to power. The world has will to power. Yeah, well, and if he weren't, and if he weren't so, how can I put this? Crassly inhumane and unprincipled, if he actually coherently and consistently embraced and embodied that ethos, I would support it entirely. Like, for example, the idea that America should seize Greenland and Canada is a no-brainer, obviously. Okay? And like, what is Greenland, like Danish are going to fight America over Greenland? Like, what are you talking about? What are you so yeah, sure. But that has to, if you're going to engage in that kind of an imperial project, that's an imperial project. That's America transforming from a republic into an empire. And you need an ethical foundation for that. Not ethical like a moral world order, but an ethos that's cohesive. Okay, we're not going to be a republic anymore. We're going to be an empire. All right? For how many hundreds of years do you want to be an empire? You're going to need an ethical foundation for that project. Otherwise, it ain't going to work. Okay, because other people with stronger ethoses, more tightly knit societies, they're going to fuck you up. And the majority of the world is going to go behind them because they're going to seem morally superior.
Well, when it comes to the morally superior question, just to push back a little bit or steelman the people who really, really don't like what's going on with Greenland right now,
Yes.
They would say that after World War II, these civilizational countries had an understanding. We're not going to invade each other. We're not going to fuck each other over. We're going to trade, and we're just going to be good. We're going to be nice and civilized. As far as the third world, all right, whatever. But at least we got this understanding. And now it seems the understanding is broken, and now it's every man for himself. And when it's every man for himself, then there's justification for Russia to take territory, for China to take territory. And now a lot of these, let's say, reliances that countries had before where, well, if somebody attacks me, then I'll just get like my gang here of civilized people to have my back. that's not there anymore. And I think what they're afraid of the most is they see this third worldism within the United States, maybe as this feedback loop between the kind of people that are in the United States today mentally and leadership. But that's why it isn't even that they would be opposed maybe to some enlightened Alexander the Great Hellenism style American empire, but they're just seeing what exactly the people are right now.
I agree with you entirely. I agree with you. Look, I agree entirely with the last point that you're making,
Yeah.
but to go back to what you're saying about the post-World War II order, the fact of the matter is that it was not some kind of a gentleman's agreement between civilized nations. NATO is the American empire, okay? The United States, from 1945 onward, was the guarantor of security in at least Western Europe. Greenland is part of that. And the only one who has a military presence in Greenland at Thule Base is the United States anyway. And in terms of geostrategic threat from Russia and even from Chinese shipping and naval force projection, it's vital the United States control Greenland. There's another reason why Greenland is important, which goes back to what I was saying earlier about the geophysical disaster. American intelligence knows about the pole shift, and they know that the ice in Greenland is going to melt. There will be no ice in Greenland in 2050, except on the top of the mountains. That's a vast. Have you ever looked at the map and see what size Greenland is compared to the rest of the United States? It's a vast landmass with tremendous resources which can be settled by Americans on top of its geostrategic value in the Arctic. And the American intelligence knows this. American intelligence also knows they're going to lose all the coastal cities. We're going to lose Boston, New York, Washington, Miami, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Washington, New Orleans, Houston, Dallas. It's all gone. None of them exist in 2050. So you need land. You need more land. You're going to need a place. And also the climate and temperature here is going to change because the United States will be located, if America exists at all in a politically unified manner in 2050, the latitude will be different. The climate will be different. And like, for example, Canada will be a lot warmer. So the new cities will have to arise in different places. So for many reasons, Greenland is vital. And the fact of the matter is that even if it's impolitic to say it, from 1945 onward, the United States has effectively guaranteed the security of the Western world. So Denmark is not in any position to be arguing with the United States over Greenland. But you're right that when a bunch of gangsters and lowlifes are determining policy in the United States, I can understand why the Danes would be a little upset to lose Greenland to this kind of American leadership.
But also, wouldn't America have Greenland de facto anyway? Like, it almost seems kind of tasteless.
No, because and this goes back to what I just said about the internal high-level intelligence assessments. If Denmark controls Greenland and Denmark is part of NATO, then yes, the United States can build a few military bases in Greenland. Mm-hmm. They know the ice is going to melt. They want settlement of millions of Americans on the bare land of Greenland. They know this. And so you only are going to be able to do that if America owns Greenland. It has to become, first it's going to become a territory, and then it will become a state. And Americans will just go live there the way they live in Alaska. So that's the issue, is large-scale American settlement by the tens of millions in Greenland and the total control of the resources of that land by the United States. Wow. They can't tell the public that because it would crash the economy if they explained why exactly it is that they need Greenland.
Well, that's definitely an answer that a lot of the people that have complained about it, I don't even think they took any of that into consideration.
Nowhere on their horizon,
No. Okay, so here is the thing, everybody. We have these many $20 super chats, but no more super chats now. I'm doing the cutoff because this is too much. And I want you guys to think of a really, really great question to ask Jason that'll close this out. So here, let me go to the next super chatter, who is, if I didn't miss anything, Uber Baby. I wonder if she's connected to Steph. By the way, shout out to Uber Boyo. Uber Baby. Hi, Dr. Jorjani, can you give me your thoughts on the new version of Eyes Wide Shut? Thanks.
It was horrible. I got very angry watching it because it's not in any way, shape, or form a director's cut. And Criterion basically ruined themselves. Their whole reputation is putting out like actual director's cuts of films, which involves painstaking years of like going into archives and finding old prints, and they go to great lengths to try to piece together how a director had wanted his film to be presented, and getting around whatever kind of censorships occurred over the years. Eyes Wide Shut director's cut was the international version. It was exactly the same shit's been around for decades. It didn't even have the original Bhagavad Gita score, which was removed 2 weeks after the film was released into the theaters. They didn't even go to the trouble of getting Jocelyn Pook's widely available album, Flood, which was a soundtrack for the movie, and taking that track and just layering it onto the publicly available print of Eyes Wide Shut, so that at least the audio of the movie would be as Stanley Kubrick intended it, let alone whatever scenes were cut out of that film that had to do with, child trafficking and so forth. None of that was restored. So it was an absolute travesty.
And real quick follow-up, Stanley Kubrick's daughter, any opinion on where she's at as far as the kind of thing she talks about?
I'm not familiar with what she's talking about these days.
Okay. Well,
I mean, she always denied that, her father died as a result of any conspiracy and so forth, but I'm not familiar with any more recent comments from her.
No problem. Here we go. This is an interesting name. Rat the Chicken. Kind of reminds me of some of Ben Avery's listeners. How do you see nature in play with progress? Is the biosphere, Gaia Sophia, protecting us from archons, or to be conquered, or an artful in-between?
An artful in-between.
Oh, well, last part. Whose side are the trees on? Also, do you see plant psychedelics as useful?
Not, the trees, I don't, they probably don't like the archons all that much. Plant psychedelics, I would say very useful.
Definitely, back in the day. All right, here we go. Next one, Young. By the way, we got a copy of the Red Book over here. Full size, by the way. This is the same size that Carl Jung wrote the Red Book on. Just to show over here, this is how big it is. Look at this thing. It's enormous. I just want to quickly show over here in the Lev cam before we get to the super chat. Look at this. Look at this beautiful work. Isn't this amazing? Not doing justice to Jung right now, but look at this beautiful font that he was using. This is quite.
It reminds me of a Manichaean manuscript.
Yeah, Mani created his own.
His own script, and he also did miniature paintings for his own manuscripts.
Yeah. So, guys, this is also a good opportunity to remind everyone that Break the Rules does have a Discord server. So if you guys are on Discord, go there. I think my friend Didier will post the Discord server link. And yeah, you can link up with like-minded people and talk about the Red Book and dream interpretation. So anyway, here we go. The Red Book is back where it belongs. And of course, Thanosis right on top. Anyway, let's get to the next super chat from Young Anarch. Kind of a rap name. Dr. Jorjani, what do you think of Nick Land as you both are in support of technological singularity, but Nick is anti-human and anti-individual since he doesn't put much importance on the human organism as much as you do?
I would refer this person to my extensive essay on Nick Land, which is in my Substack. Jason Reza Jorjani Substack. It's called Satan, Land, and Tradition. And I wrote it after Nick Land was discussed on Tucker Carlson's show, and then did a few podcasts in which basically Nick Land aligned himself with traditionalism and with Alexander Dugin. And so I would urge you to go read that essay, Satan, Land, and Tradition, and decide whether you think that Nick Land is actually someone who's representing progress and a kind of constructive technological acceleration, or whether he's a nihilist who really feeds into traditionalism.
And the next super chat over here from Lady Ariana, back with us here. Is there any legal way to stop the genocide against Iran by holding America accountable or by offering the White House something it wants, like China loyalty or energy interest at this point?
No. The only way to dissuade America, meaning the Trump administration, from making a deal with the Islamic Republic is to impress upon them that it will lead to the destruction of the United States. Again, this is not a cohesive and natural country. It's an artificial contractual nation. And if there was some kind of a directive, creative elite of Americans who were capable of actualizing the kind of vision that I sketched out in broad brushstrokes, then we could talk about the possibility of an actual American nation forming. And maybe even of an American empire devoted to projecting those values globally and maybe cosmically. I mean, after all, Star Trek and Star Wars are cosmic visions. But currently, America is a contractual country, and it's a contractual country with immense internal social problems, massive ethnic tensions, massive regional conflicts based on historical grievances between Dixie and the North, and between various ethnicities in this country who we know, I mean, you know, racial tension has never been higher in the history of the United States than it is now. The United States would be making a fatal mistake to try to cripple Iran and forcibly hold the Iranian people, who obviously are willing to die for their freedom, under this tyrannical Islamic regime. Some attempt to keep them within this retarded power structure is going to invite a retaliation that will shatter this country into 5 or 6 pieces. Okay? I urge you to research SAVAK, Iranian State Security and Intelligence, and its relationship with the Mossad. Okay? If the Iranian people are betrayed, and Reza Pahlavi's valiant attempts to advocate in a diplomatic manner, in an economically savvy way on behalf of them, fades into memory over the course of the next 3 years, where the Iranian people have to suffer some weakened form of the Islamic Republic subsidized by the United States, you will have someday an Iranian state security and intelligence apparatus which will shatter this country into 5 or 6 pieces. Don't fuck around and find out. I'm telling you right now. You can take that to the bank. Don't fuck around and find out. With a country that was invaded by the Greeks, invaded by the Romans, invaded by the Arabs, by the Turks and the Mongols, and is still here. And is 3 times the size of France. And optimally, geographically situated after the catastrophe. Don't do it. Bad idea. You won't have a country. You will have various ethnically war-torn shitholes, okay? And you'll become a hillbilly backwater of a world where freedom and independence and progress and innovation are being defended by Iran against China, Russia, and the rest of the Islamic world.
By the way, Jason, there was this news came out pretty recently from Donald Trump. Effective immediately, any country doing business with the Islamic Republic of Iran will pay a tariff of 25% on any and all business being done with the United States of America. This order is final and conclusive. Thank you for attention to this matter.
Yeah, all he's doing is basically tightening the screws economically so that a deal will be more acceptable to them. And by the way, I do think that within probably the next 72 hours, we're going to see an American military strike on Iran. I think we're going to see Trump intervene militarily in Iran. He promised to do that. And then after he promised to do that 3 times, and at that point, I think 2,000 Iranians had been massacred, Trump came out, gave an interview with Sean Hannity on Fox, and he said, oh, the people who have been killed so far were killed in stampede. You know, the way cattle stampede. He compared the Iranian people to cattle. The valiant Iranian people who were massacred in the streets, Donald Trump compared them to cattle. And he invented this imaginary stampede, which, by the way, this didn't exist. Nowhere in Iran did people die from a stampede. This was a talking point invented by the National Iranian American Council, NIAC, the lobby of the Islamic Republic Mullah Ayatollah terrorist regime in Washington. And Donald Trump parroted that in an interview, okay, with Sean Hannity on Fox. So he utterly just fucking insulted the Iranian people in a way that is completely unforgivable. Completely unforgivable. Frankly, I don't think any Iranian government should deal with him. Comparing Iranians to cattle and suggesting that the 2,000 people who had been shot with AK-47s up to that point had died in some stampede. Because he actually didn't want to go through with his threat of carrying out military intervention. So yes, Donald Trump will come in and he'll give him a slap on the wrist militarily. He'll tighten the screws economically, give him a slap on the wrist militarily. And the end result will be exactly what it was with Operation Midnight Hammer, where the Israelis during the unfortunately 12-day war, the Israelis had a 1-month-long plan for Operation Rising Lion to lead to the overthrow of the Islamic Republic. Donald Trump came in there with his Midnight Hammer and his B-2s that he loves so much, and he royally fucked the Israeli regime change plan, and he bragged about it on Twitter. He said, he addressed the religious leader of Iran. Yeah. You're supposed to be a religious man. You're supposed to have values. You shouldn't lie the way you're lying. I saved your life. The Israelis knew exactly where you were. They were going to kill you. They were going to take you out. I saved your life. Therefore, the blood of 4,000 Iranians is on the hands of Donald Trump. If Khamenei had been taken out when the Israelis wanted to take him out, these people wouldn't be dead right now. Okay? That's the person who's trying to cut a deal with the Islamic Republic. And yes, in the next 72 hours, he'll send some more B-2s and he'll bomb a few targets, and then he'll bring them to the negotiating table. I hope I'm wrong about all of that. I hope I'm wrong. But we'll find out soon enough.
And like you were saying, I hope that the Iranian people, regardless of Trump's plan or whoever's plan, are going to overthrow their government finally. You know, because we have had these things where it seems like America wants a nation to go one way, and I think it's important to remind everybody that these are not all powerful beings that have planned everything out in advance. At least I hope that's not the case if we're talking about not even just Trump, but like the people above him.
No, I don't think that's the case. You know, as I've always said, resistance is not futile. If resistance were futile, we would never have had, Hellenistic Alexandria. If resistance were futile, we would never have had the Italian Renaissance. If resistance were futile, the United States would never have arisen. Okay, so resistance is possible in various pockets at various times. And I see Iran becoming the next fortress and bastion of freedom on the planet. We may be embattled. It may be a struggle of a David versus Goliath, an apt metaphor, because I think Israel will, in the end, be aligned with Iran in that kind of a world, because frankly, I don't think the Jews have a choice. I think that, Israel and the Jewish diaspora at large has lost the whole world, including increasingly the youth in America. Mm-hmm. And so the only remaining ally of, Israel and the Jewish people are the majority of Iranians. It's probably the most pro-Israel country on the face of the earth. Certainly was the most pro-American country on the face of the earth. But I'll tell you one thing, it won't be after Trump makes a deal with the Islamic Republic. So, yeah, we may be David versus Goliath, but the struggle will continue and hopefully will expand out into the rest of the solar system.
I hope so, too. Does anybody have any... Okay, here we go. Let me make sure the view is correct. That's pretty good. I mean, the sun is... Helios is shining quite brightly. Could you move a little bit forward? No, that's even worse. Actually, move the right. Here we go. Even more. There we go. Now you're... Okay, good. It's fine. It's good.
Jason, you've presented a very fatalistic picture.
Wait, I'm sorry. The wood thing is blocking you a little bit that way. Okay, there we go. Right. Okay, now perfect.
Jorjani, you've painted a very fatalistic picture of Western Europe in your ideas and your talk today and many of your various presentations. I would just like to ask you what advice you have for the men and women of Europe who are invested in preserving their heritage and their culture in the light of the coming catastrophe, the increasing prevalence of Islam in major cities, and the banal, lifeless managerialism that characterizes the contemporary political discourse.
Excellent. So here I would say, again, Iran is of vital importance. The trap that Europeans are about to fall into is to basically attempt to defend against Islam and perhaps even to expel these large Muslim migrant populations by defaulting to some kind of traditionalist authoritarianism. So a paternalistic form of European fascism is likely to be the reaction. I mean, we talk about these days a reactionary European politics, right? In Italy and France. Not so much in Germany. When it comes back in Germany, it will have the face of Adolf Hitler, which I predicted a long time ago. Lost my career over that prediction that wound up in the New York Times. So Europeans are falling into the similar trap of the American right that gravitates towards Nick Fuentes, is that they want to resist Islam with something that's almost as regressive, retarded, ossified, and lacks developmental possibilities, whereas the defining spirit of Western Europe is Promethean. I mean, what made Europe great is the Promethean ethos. So what Europe needs from the outside is an example, an exemplar of a country that both ruthlessly resists Islam. Islam will be wiped out in Iran. And in short order, it'll be wiped out in the neighborhood around Iran because it poses a national security threat to Iran. Europeans need to see that. They will get confidence from it. And on top of that, it's a population who identify as Aryans, and their country is literally called the Aryan nation. Okay? So Europeans will become less embarrassed, less sheepish and hesitant looking at what Iran does to Islam, both inside its borders and in its immediate neighborhood. But then Europeans also need to learn from Iranians that the name in which that's being done is the name of progress. The point of defeating Islam is to resume a progressive trajectory of civilizational development, progress in the true sense of the word, not these social justice warrior retards where they think feminism is encouraging the proliferation of Islam in Western societies, right? So one of the most unique characteristics of Iranian society is, on the one hand, a will toward greater women's empowerment, a will toward technological and scientific development at breakneck speed. And we're talking about a country that from 900 to 1100 was the capital of techno-scientific development in the world, has that, history behind it. Decides to deal decisively with the problem of Islam, it needs in front of itself, in view, an exemplar of the right reason why Islam is being rejected. Namely, to resume the Promethean trajectory of civilizational development that for so long Europe was the torchbearer of. So here again, I think it's vital. And then if you want to understand historically the deep ties between the Iranian and European peoples, read my book, Iranian Leviathan. At great length, I talk about the Saxons and their Scythian origins, the Celtic connection to the Scythians, how the Sarmatians became the Alans in France, and what a huge role they played in the development of high culture in the Middle Ages. The higher culture of the Middle Ages, the Gothic culture, the chivalric poetry, the culture of the troubadours in Occitan, all has Iranian origins and has to do with the migration of Sarmatians, or as they call them in Europe, Alans, into the European continent. And of course, these people are all ancestrally cousins and come from one place around the Black Sea. Actually, they come from Ukraine. So, here's a case where a long-lost cousin can help to salvage European civilization and teach it the right way to reject Islam and not fall into the trap of some kind of paternalistic, traditionalist fascism, right? So I would say You know, that's what's needed for Western Europe. Again, it would be nice if somehow the deeper aspirations of the founding fathers of the United States and that vision for a novus ordo seclorum could be resuscitated here, and America could fulfill its destiny as the defender and frontier of the free world. But it's not looking good. And yet again, I guarantee you that if the United States makes a deal with the Islamic Republic, it's over. It's the final nail in the coffin. Look, there's only so much one can take, okay? This is a country where the deep state assassinated its own president, John F. Kennedy, mainly over the UFO file, assassinated his brother RFK, assassinated Martin Luther King, experimented on children in MK Ultra, dropped napalm on Vietnamese children, okay? It's a country that engineered the Islamic Revolution in Iran to begin with from 1978 to 79. They went in, and because they were afraid of the Soviet Union invading Iran through Afghanistan and seizing Iranian oil resources on the Persian Gulf, they went in and they turned what would have been a communist revolution against the Shah, which could have been dealt with very differently, into an Islamic revolution by engineering groups like the Mojahideen Khalq, the MEK, as an interface between purely communist groups like the Tudeh Party and the Fadayan and the Ayatollahs. So, and then after that, we have the wonderful adventure in Afghanistan where the United States created the Taliban, the United States created Al-Qaeda. So poor Afghan people wound up under burqas and being just brutalized into subhumans as a result of United States policy in Afghanistan, as if like the Soviet Union was so bad that this is what we needed to resort to, really, to defeat the Soviet. I wish the Soviet Union were here today as our rival instead of China. Soviet Union was a great enemy. You want good enemies. The Soviets were wonderful. They were, you know, reaching into deep space. They were reaching into the inner space of the human psyche. They had an amazing psychotronics program. Those are the kind of people you want to compete with. Not like a fucking Chinese termite colony, hive-minded insect, you know, society. Fuck that. I want a worthy rival to the United States.
And by the
whose
way,
bright idea was it to take apart the Soviet Union and in the process subject the Afghan people to what they've suffered in all these decades. And then 9/11. Okay? A consummate inside job in which people like Dick Cheney, who run the reverse engineering program, according to David Grush, presided over the incineration of 3,000 American citizens in the Twin Towers and used it to justify wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, which were absolutely unnecessary. I mean, Afghanistan, we could have just taken out Osama. By the way, Osama died early in the Afghan war, and they covered that up and pretended that he was alive for a long time after that. In any case, Benazir Bhutto came out and admitted that, and then she was killed shortly thereafter to cover it up. But the Iraq war was completely unnecessary. Now, as an Iranian, I'm no fan of Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein was responsible for killing 500,000 Iranians at least and maiming another 500,000. Okay, so he's responsible for 1 million Iranian casualties in the Iran-Iraq war over 8 years. No fan of Saddam. But Saddam had nothing to do with 9/11. And the destruction of the secular regime of Saddam Hussein opened a vacuum which resulted in the rise of ISIS, the Islamic Caliphate of Iraq and Syria, which enslaved women and brutalized children and genocided the Kurds in Iraq and in Syria. That is the United States policy. So I have made excuse after excuse after excuse for this country and whitewashed its policies and tried to write a fucking book proposing how this country should be saved. But I'm done. I'm done. Trump makes a deal with the Islamic Republic. It is a nail in the coffin of the United States of America. Mark my words.
and with that note, I think this is a good way to end it, except it's not, because I have one final question for you, Jason, which goes back to this wonderful book, Thanosis. When it comes to getting ready for what's coming, like, let's say you're right, unfortunately, about the direction that America's headed. For those of us who see the writing on the wall at that point and want to work together, as well as want to participate in the spectral revolution, which from what I'm getting, it's all converging at the same time. When that happens, what exactly can people do on a practical level to get ready? I mean, obviously, working out is important and, keeping oneself in good shape. But in terms of, things that go into this more psi realm.
Yeah, right. Well, look, I mean, obviously, you can gather from everything that I'm saying, and if, again, you want a clearer picture of it, read my Substack piece on convergent catastrophes. There are going to be a lot of dead people in the next 20 to 30 years on this planet. More people will be dead on this planet in the next 20 to 30 years than will be alive. Okay? We will not have faced such a situation on this earth for 12,000 years, where we live on a haunted planet. Okay? More people will be in what the Tibetans call the bardo state than will be in bodies. And so the most important thing is understanding what the soul is and how to try to will oneself into the optimal conditions of rebirth and to take as much control as possible over one's spiritual path and trajectory, so as not to be coerced by various manipulative, deceptive entities like the devas that Zarathustra warned us about 3,000 years ago. So that's what my book Thanosis is ultimately about. And it ends, like I said, with some very practical suggestions, drawing from the history of parapsychological research and from various spiritual traditions, to try to basically amplify human agency to the maximum extent, beyond bodily death. So, I think that's vital in terms of the right group of people deciding to coordinate together across the chasm of death and to build a new world from out of the ruins of this one. Hopefully we'll do a better job than the Atlanteans did.
Hopefully so, Jason. And where could people find this book?
On Amazon, you can get it from Arctos, you can get it from Amazon directly.
And you also have a Substack?
Yeah, put the link in the description if you can.
It's already
after
there.
The fact. Excellent. So, yeah, my Substack, again, goes into depth and detail about the convergent catastrophes. There's 5 or 6 pieces on Iran in there, and a lot of writing on the breakaway civilization and the American deep state, which is very much the same subject matter that I address in my book, Closer Encounters.
And guys, I want to thank the audience here for being here. Like, again, I don't know if you are aware of this, all of the 900 people who are watching this on YouTube right now, but we actually do have a live audience on BTR NYC in the heart of New York City, and the way that you could be part of this is by becoming a patron. Patreon.com/breaktherules is where you go, and if you become a $20 plus patron, emphasis on the plus, then you're going to get access to these exclusive shows where some of the smartest people on Earth, like Dr. Jason Reza Jorjani, come and speak with, I think, some of the smartest audiences on Earth. So if you guys want to be a part of it, you know what to do. I keep on telling you that it's going to grow, and it has, and it's grown thanks to wonderful people like this, and thanks to you guys who are watching it. So make sure to smash that like button, smash that subscribe button, join the Discord, click the bell. Please support Dr. Jorjani and his amazing, astounding, very important work, and keep being curious. So thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you. Until next time, take care, everybody. Bye-bye. End stream.